The story begins with the main character in the male dormitory at the Tsinghua College. One of the students told him that he was going on a date. Gao with a smile explained to the student that he was an interview, and dressed in an imperious style. Gao was considered one of the best students at the Faculty of Physics in college. The main character rang the phone. He held out his hand in his pocket and took the device. The guy on the phone joyfully suggested that Gao come to them for lunch. The guy joyfully opened the door. He said that people from the Faculty of Business are called the Faculty of Faculty. One of the students shouted to the surprised main character that he would have to revive the glory of the Faculty of Physics. The main character walked along the street. The guy made an appointment for him for tomorrow for 6 hours in the restaurant Hot Pot. Gao promised to come. The main character stood in the middle of the street. He saw a red signal on a traffic light. Gao reminded himself that he took a certificate of personality and resume. He needed to cross the lane and reach the metro station. He went for an interview at the Bai Corporation. This company was known all over the world. The main character had 175 centimeters growth. He could not even buy an iPhone 5. His beautiful appearance was not enough even to feed himself. The guy heard displeasedly how the car had signaled him from the side. Gao turned around and shouted to an unfamiliar driver that he had learned his manners from dogs. The door opened in a red racing car. The driver went out and said to the main character in a displeased voice that he had just said her words, "Stranger." Near the car, she looked angry. The main character carefully studied her with a look. Gao noted that the driver looked beautiful even when she was angry. He smiled joyfully and thought that the girl became a holiday for his eyes. The stranger looked angrily at the protagonist and shouted that she was talking to him now. Gao angrily thought that the girl did not even allow him to look at her. The driver angrily shouted to the guy that he should pay her for damage now. Gao asked the girl in a calm voice, "Why did she go in such a narrow alley?" He told her that he was not to blame for her mistakes. The driver got angry. She angrily asked the guy whose fault was it? She recalled that Gao blocked her road, and she turned to the side so as not to crash into him. Gao looked at the girl in dismay. He thought that perhaps it was his fault. He could not pay for the repair of an expensive car. The main character ran to the car and began to wipe it with his hands. He asked the driver not to worry. The driver stood on the side and watched the guy wipe her car in front. The stranger scaredly asked the guy, "What is he doing?" Gao, with a piece of paper, very much scratched the car in front. Gao looked into his own hands in dismay and realized that he was holding sandpaper there. The stranger is very angry. The main character began to ask her not to act impulsively. The girl squeezed her hand with all her strength into a fist. The guy explained to her that the sandpaper was to blame for everything. An angry driver attacked him. The car drove up to the gates of the Bai Corporation. The guard near the entrance raised the barrier. The girl got out of the car and held the documents in her hands. The guard greeted her. The driver with a smile told the employees that they can call her manager Bai. Workers were very happy. The guy admiringly said that the president's daughter is very beautiful. Employees of the company could not understand who could scratch the girl's car. The manager prepared to sit at the table. The employee came up and said that she needed her signature on the contract. The manager began to disassemble the documents. She saw that Gao Fu Shui, already familiar to her, had come for an interview. Bai beat the guy. After that, he told her that he had an important meeting today. He cannot be late. He promised that he would pay completely debt. The girl looked displeasedly at the documents and thought that the guy even had a shameless name. Bai glanced angry at the guy's photograph. She decided that he would be rejected immediately at an interview. Mentally, she cursed Gao. The main character suddenly sneezed. He sat and was waiting for an interview to work. Gao thought that the girl might just remembered him. At this time, someone called him on the side. The workers laughed very cheerfully when they heard the name of the protagonist. Gao sat upset. The main character began to scream the secretary from the place that he is nearby. Gao prepared to open the door to the office. He joyfully thought that the legendary businessman Bai Zhao was sitting there. The guy with a smile and thought that he was now taking the first step to bring closer to his idol. After 30 seconds, the manager told the guy that he would only create problems. An employee with glasses informed the main character that he had never even heard of his college. Gao jumped up sharply and demanded that the manager be serious for his interview. The main character went to the exit. He held out his hand to the side and said in a formidable voice that the Bai Corporation would soon go bankrupt. A man entered the office from the side. He asked the guy with displeasure, "What would happen to his corporation?" Workers were surprised to greet the president. Gao was very scared and surprised. He did not expect to meet President Bai at such a moment. The protagonist looked closely and noticed that the girl already familiar to him appeared behind the president. He greeted her in a frightened voice. Gao understood that he had met a Porsche driver in front of him. The guy did not understand what the girl was doing here. Bai called her father an evil voice. The man looked displeased at the protagonist. Gao scaredly realized that the girl recognized him. He decided that he had already overwhelmed an interview. The main character scaredly realized that the director of the company is the father of the girl, and he offended her. The president looked at the guy and asked if he came for an interview. Gao scaredly told the man that he had failed and wants to leave. The president reminded the guy that he came just a minute ago. The manager scaredly told the guy that the interview had just begun. He asked the secretary of Xiao to bring the chatter to the applicant. Gao joyfully noticed that the manager changed very quickly in his face. He decided that he had a chance to pass an interview. Xiao with a smile brought the guy tea on a tray. Gao decided to use the situation in his interests. The president told the employees that he would remain with them and would watch how they adhere to labor ethics. The manager said with excitement that they will continue the interview. Gao looked at him in surprise. The manager said with a smile to the guy that he had a lot of talents. He held his documents in his hands. The employee decided that the protagonist had ties with the president's daughter. Gao explained that he graduated from a regular college and he was not a major specialist. Gao glanced at the manager and decided that he could now use this situation to pass an interview. The worker at the table continued to compliment the main character. He said that it was this type of people who was looking for their corporation. The guy thanked the man for praise. He recalled that he has a common education. The manager with a smile told the main character that they were hiring him in Bai Corporation. The main character was very surprised. He did not expect him so quickly to work in the corporation. Gao thought joyfully that he had come an interview. Now the distance between him and his idol has been reduced. Bai asked the manager displeasedly, how did he determine so quickly that the guy could suit them? They did not even learn any information about the candidate. The main character of The Frightened turned around and looked at the girl and her father. The manager in fright asked the girl, is Gao not her friend? The interlocutor replied that she only met this guy today. Bai explained in a dissatisfied voice that she would not make friendship with the person who scratched her car. The manager told the main character in a frightened voice to find another corporation for himself. Bai looked angrily at the guy. She was wondering how he would now pay for the repair of her car. Gao headed for the door and said that he would leave right away. At this time, someone called the surprised protagonist from behind. Gao was scared and stopped. He immediately realized who had just called him. The director stood near the table. He shouted to the guy near the doors to wait. Gao turned around in dismay and looked at the president of Bai. He did not understand what was happening. The man held the documents in his hands and asked the guy, is this his resume? Gao joyfully confirmed that this was his resume. The man asked the guy, was he really scratched his daughter by the name of Xiao Sui? The guy was very scared. The president told him that he gave the car to the girl for her birthday. The president with a smile explained to the main character that he would pay a lot to pay for the repair of the car. Gao thought with fright to himself that he would work hard to pay the debt. The president told the main character that he would be the interns of his company. He will pay the debt from the salary. The man told the guy that he could go to work on the next Monday. The manager and the girl were very surprised. The main character was very surprised when he heard that he was offered to work as an intern. The president told strictly manager the bath to take the remnants of his salary in the financial department. The president told the frightened subordinate that he does not need people like him. The president turned around and told the guy that he would be informed of specific details of the work. Gao answered the man that he really wants to work here. The protagonist bowed to the man to thank him for an appointment with a job. Gao shouted with a smile to the president and promised to work hard. The main character ran joyfully to the exit. He went through an interview. Zhu looked displeased after the guy. She was very disappointed due to the fact that he received a job. The president held the documents in his hands. The daughter told him that the specialty of the guy does not correspond to the position. Zhu asked her father displeasedly, why did he take the guy to work? The president turned around and asked her daughter if she remembered the crisis in the company's information systems 3 years ago. The father reminded the surprised daughter that the mysterious guy helped them the last time. Zhe was very surprised when she heard about a mysterious guy. Gao was walking down the street at this time. The main character approached the restaurant and ordered a beer mug from the waiter. The guy sharply grabbed a beer mug and immediately drained it to the bottom. Gao held a glass in his hands. He shouted joyfully that he is a hero with a capital letter. The guy was surprised to notice that he was at the table himself. He realized that he had come an hour earlier. Gao went to the wall and saw an ad. There was a private tutor with hourly payment. Gao was very surprised due to the fact that high school needed a tutor for $400 per hour. The main character called the announcement. He thought joyfully that if he finds a job, he would rather pay a debt for repairs for a girl. Gao asked the guy about the phone about the information for the private tutor. A girl appeared on the side near the table. Gao joyfully informed the guy that he would freely cope with the problem student. The protagonist told his last name by phone. At this time, a stranger with blue hair approached him from the side. The guy shouted to the guy on the phone that they needed to agree on the place and time of the meeting. Gao looked at the girl with surprise and answered nothing on the phone. The stranger looked at the guy with interest. At this time, the protagonist still had a phone and the guy could not wait for an answer from him. The girl reminded the main character about his phone with interest. Gao, in dismay, held the device in his hands. The main character told the guy that he had urgent affairs and they need to be solved. The stranger asked the guy if he is a high school student. The main character smiled at the girl and said that he was studying in the last year of the Faculty of Physics. He invited her to sit down. The stranger sat down at the table. She said that her name is Lin Lula and she was in her first year. The main character explained to the interlocutor that his name sounds a little strange, but she may not pay attention to it. He offered her a bank with a drink. Lula cunningly turned to the side and told the guy that the rest of the guests would come now. The girl joyfully told the main character that she did not even expect someone with a name like him. Gao opened a bank with a drink. He told the girl that he would disappoint her. He personally has nothing in common with his name. Lula explained to her guy that he is a good and responsive person. At this time, the man led two women. They all looked at the protagonist. Gao jumped to his feet near the table. He thought that he needed to be dumped as soon as possible. Lula was also very strongly worried. She scared and went to the guy. The girl in a frightened voice suggested that the main character so that she sat next to him. Gao agreed with her proposal. The student in a frightened voice explained to the guy that she was a little afraid of strangers. A man ran up from the side and said in a joyful voice that their boss Gao came here very early. The man looked at the girl with surprise and reminded her that she did not say that she would come. The guest cunningly knocked on the side of the protagonist and said that a beauty from the Faculty of Business came to a meeting. Gao swung in his hand and told a friend named Li Tao that he hinted to him, as if he were not a man. At this time, guests ran on the side. They all searched for the protagonist. Liu hugged the guy and shouted to the guest that he was right here. The man touched the face of the protagonist with his hand and said that this was a real Gao. The main character shyly smiled at the guests and explained to them that his name was Gao Shuai. Two students ran behind the man lying on the floor and began to beat him. Two girls beat a man. Liu scaredly shouted to the main character and girl to save him. One of the guys could not believe that he saw Lin Lula in front of him. Another student was surprised due to the fact that the girl was sitting next to the main character. A student ran up from the side. She greeted the surprised Lula loudly. A girl with a green bow ran to the side of the frightened Lula and grabbed her hand. Lula turned around and greeted Nini's girlfriend with a smile. A cheerful student with a green bow told the guests that she was a neighbor Lula around the room. The main character was delighted. He smiled at the girl and greeted her. The girl asked the guy cunningly, "Did he like Lula?" Gao scaredly replied that he had only met a student. Gao looked aside. He noticed that Lula was sitting at the table and students were standing next to her. Neither cunningly turned around and told the main character that she wants to help him get Lula, but she wants something in return. The student answered the guy that when she came up with, she would tell him immediately. She explained to her new acquaintance with a smile that he would have a small service for her. For example, he can treat her with dinner. Liu came up to the girl with a glass of beer. He invited her to try. Gao grabbed a glass from the hands of a man. He said he wanted to sing a girl. Liu took his hands into a glass. He said with a smile to the guy that he himself would drink 3 circles at once. Students jumped joyfully to their feet and prepared to knock with glasses to drink. After half an hour, all the participants in the feast got drunk. A bunch of dishes stood on the table. Students supported each other and headed for the exit. Gao waved his hand and reminded them to be more careful on the way back. The main character sat at a table with a bunch of dirty dishes. He felt his head was sick. Gao grabbed the door and prepared to leave. He turned and looked into the room. The guy noticed how a student with blue hair slept on the couch. Gao could not understand what the girl was doing in this place. Lula woke up and pulled her eyes. Lula complained to the guy with a dissatisfied voice that she was dizzy a little. Gao rang the phone. The guy wrote to the main character so that he would not do anything indecent with Lula. The protagonist turned in surprise and looked at the girl. She sat on the couch. The student felt weak. She closed her eyes and began to fall. Gao quickly and scared ran to the girl and grabbed her with his hands so that she would not fall. The student in a weak voice explained to the guy that she was dizzy. She could not even stand normally. Lula asked the surprised guy to bring her to the hostel. The main character was delighted. He smiled at the girl and confirmed that he would help her. Students around were surprised. They realized that the main character walked nearby with Lin Lula. Gao looked aside. He understood displeasedly that people around them would look at them and make false conclusions. Gao silently turned and looked aside at the girl. She walked next to him. The main character decided that it was time for him to act. He held out his hand to hug a student. Gao walked along the evening street and supported his girlfriend with his hand. Suddenly, she called him. Lula, in a wearing voice, informed the main character that she was very difficult to breathe. The guy was very scared. He removed his hand from the girl and asked her forgiveness. The main character looked aside and noticed that the girl laid her head on his shoulder. Gao decided to himself that he should not let the girl let go. She was still walking with her eyes closed. The main character shouted to his companion to wake up. Lula opened her eyes. The protagonist pointed forward ahead. He told the girl that they had already come before them a female hostel. Lula looked aside and in a joyful voice confirmed the guy that he was right. Gao warned a girlfriend to get up more carefully up the stairs. He held her hand. Lula looked slyly at her friend and asked, would he really not go further with her? Gao looked at the girl with great fright and excitement. He wanted to go with her. The guy sadly explained to his girlfriend that in a female dormitory he would be kicked out into the street. He once tried to do this but failed. After a small pause, Lula asked the main character to give a phone number for her. She promised him to write a message when she got to her room. Gao waved his hand in front of the gate. He told her that she could record his number. The guy looked carefully at the phone. He heard that he had received a message. Lula wrote a message to a friend. She thanked him for everything and reported that she had reached her room. Gao was very pleased due to the fact that he already had a girlfriend's phone number. Lula sighed excitedly. She looked at the guy and wanted to say something to him. Gao looked strictly at the girl and said that there is no need to say anything else. Gao told his girlfriend that he already understood everything. He pressed her with his hands to him. The guy pressed the girl to him and wanted to kiss her. At this time, someone called him on the side. The frightened student extended his hands to the side and tried to fight off the protagonist. The guy swung and with all his might hit the protagonist with his hand over his face to wake up. Gao opened his eye. He asked his friend displeasedly, why did he get so broken in the morning? The student in a frightened voice told his friend that he shouted to defend himself. Gao yawned deeply and asked his friend, why was he waking him up today on Saturday? The main character suddenly jumped up. He remembered that he had an interview on the tutor today. Gao office. Of a suit and prepared to leave, he told his friend displeased that he had to wake him early. Gao went to the bus to get in. A few more passengers came up behind him. The guy looked out the window and shouted with excitement that he was going to the money. The main character came to a huge palace. He cried out with admiration that this place is very huge. Gao was surprised when he saw a chic mansion in front of him. At this time, a butler came to him. The butler named Lu asked the protagonist if he came for an interview. The man told the guest to follow him. They went to huge doors. Gao, along with the butler, went inside the building. There was a rich interior, and there were already other people. The owner thanked all the people for the fact that they came for an interview. He explained that famous professors could not cope with his daughter. The man told the guest that he was ready to pay a lot of money to train the girl for an interview. Each of the applicants will receive a blank sheet of paper. The main character looked aside and noticed how the servant handed him a blank sheet of paper. Gao looked at a sheet of paper in surprise. In 20 minutes, each applicant had to make his sheet attractive, so that the girl lifted him from the floor. The artist decided to draw something beautiful on paper. Gao remembered that he himself did not know how to draw. Gao looked aside and noticed that the schoolgirl nearby wanted to fold the sheet. He thought that everyone could do origami. The main character did not know what to do. He held a piece of paper in his hands and carefully looked at him. The owner told the guests that their time had passed. He demanded that they give all their work to the maids. A cheerful maid entered the room. All guests laid their papers in her hands. Gao threw a crumpled piece of paper in the hands of a maid. The man turned to his daughter named Xin Yu and asked her to leave. Xin shouted displeasedly to her father. so that he would not try to hire more tutors. The man answered her that all this would be the last time. The guest stood and was surprised to listen to the conversation. The girl came up and looked out of the room into the hall with great distrust. Sin was beautiful and rich. She looked at the guests in the hall with disbelief. Gao looked at the girl and saw that she was very beautiful, only at a young age. The man turned to the butler and demanded that the servant scatter the paper. Lu threw a bunch of pieces of paper up and they scattered in all directions in the room. The girl was displeased due to the fact that pieces of paper were scattered throughout the room. Sin displeasedly turned her head to the side and closed her eyes. She did not want to raise pieces of paper. One of the guests said in a dissatisfied voice that he would better go home and do something useful. One of the girls viciously said that there was enough for her. Sin looked displeased at the guest. The guest told the girl that if she is rich, then she would not look at other people from top to bottom. After that, the applicant for the post of a tutor turned and headed for the exit. Other guests looked at her. Sin looked very displeasure to the side. She decided to approach and take a piece of paper. The girl crouched and raised a piece of paper from the floor. She unfolded her and was very surprised. The owner and the butler were very amazed. One of the guests shouted in surprise that Sin raised a piece of paper. The girl was very unpleasantly amazed. She looked at a piece of paper and was unhappy. The little mistress turned and very viciously called the guy a shameless. Sin swung and threw a piece of paper aside. The owner opened the sheet and looked at him carefully. He said that someone came up with such a trick. Yao said in a joyful voice that he came up with it. He reminded the man that the girl was supposed to be raised with a half smear. The guy looked at the man with a smile and reminded that his daughter lifted his piece of paper from the floor. The owner was unhappy. He shouted to the guy that he had acted very meanly and they did not agree with this. The man fell silent. He looked at the protagonist with a displeasure. The owner showed a piece of paper in front of the guests and explained that Sin Yu rose a floor with a piece of paper with money attached to her. The man read that the guy Gao Fu Shuai signed on the sheet. The guests around were very surprised when they realized that the guy's name was Gao Fu Shuai. The man told the main character that his method is very specific, but his daughter still raised a piece of paper. Sin was very excited. She told her father that she wanted to know who was so stupid of the guests that he would attach money to a sheet of paper. The girl turned her back in displeasure. She did not understand who Gao Fu Shuai was next to her. Father stroked his daughter with his hand and said that all this attracted her attention. After that, the owner sharply turned to the rest of the surprised guests. The man said that he prepared a small souvenir gift for each of the guests. Lu handed a small box to the main character. The main character joyfully held the package in his hands. He thought that he received from the owner a gold pen. Parker. The man turned around and told the guy that he should go through a real test. Even if Gao fails, he will still be grateful to him. The man held out his hand to the main character and said that his name is Shijin Lu. The main character was surprised to turn to the man after he heard his name. Cao immediately remembered the director of Bai and about the owner of the estate of Shizhong Lu. Gao bowed to the owner and asked with excitement whether he was the president of Lu Corporation. She joyfully told the guy that someone who had heard about him has already appeared here. Sin unfolded to the side. The girl turned and said in a displeased voice that the guy could not even shake his hand normally. Gao told the young mistress that he was very worried. The man came up and put his hand on the guy's shoulder. Gao thought to himself that the girl could not say comments to him. She told the guy with a cunning voice that they will now begin the second round. The girl stood near the door and looked very displeasure at the man with a guy. She told the main character that he should remain in the room of Sin Yu for 40 minutes. The man told the guy that he should make the girl so that she would accept him as a tutor. This will be considered the passage of the test. Sin viciously slammed the doors and demanded that the butler lead the guests. Gao stood very sad. He realized that it would be difficult for him to convince the girl. The man patted the guy with his hand over his shoulder and wished him good luck. Gao looked thoughtfully in front of him. He did not know how he would like the girl. The main character abruptly went into the room to the girl and cheerfully greeted her. Sin displeasedly told the guy that he had to knock before going into her room. Gao timidly asked for forgiveness for the invasion. The protagonist saw how the girl was sitting near the table and reading a book. There were large toys around her. Gao went to the girl and said with a smile that he wanted to sit next to her. Sin took a piece of cookies in her hand and bit it. She told the guy that he was not a small child and should not ask her for all permission. Gao was very angry. He looked at the girl in displeasure after her words. The guy began to calm himself. He did not need to be angry, but he had to smile. The protagonist asked the girl as a friendly voice as possible. The little mistress completely ignored the guy. She read the book. Gao was very angry. He realized that the girl belongs to the new generation children. Sin drank tea from a cup. She told the guy to leave. The way out was behind him. Gao thought to himself that a special situation requires special measures. He sat on the floor next to the girl. Sin turned to the guy displeasedly. She noticed that he grabbed a dish with sweets from the table. Gao, with great appetite, began to eat food from a plate in front of the disgruntled mistress. He explained that he would fill his stomach before leaving. The main character held out his hand and grabbed the magazine from the girl. She was very unhappy. Sin screamed displeasedly. The protagonist was surprised to say that the girl read the Korean magazine. Gao grabbed another box with sweets. He said that he wants to try them. Sin was very angry. She looked displeased at the guy and said that Dieter Muller personally prepared cookies. She demanded that the guy stop now. The guy opened the box with sweets. He said cheerfully that the Muller confectioner sounds incredibly for him. The main character told the girl that if she behaves indecently, then he himself will not restrain himself. Gao grabbed cookies with his own hands. A displeased girl was standing next to him. Sin sat on the floor next to the guy and grabbed her hands on her clothes. He looked at her in surprise. The little mistress sat and looked displeased at the guy. She was silent. After a small pause, the girl threatened the guy that her father would teach him later a lesson. Gao explained to the girl that he would ask her questions. She must answer. For the correct answers, she will take a cookie. For the wrong one, he will eat a cookie himself. Gao joyfully grabbed the treats out of the box and swallowed it. He wished himself a pleasant appetite. Sin extended her hand to the box with cookies. She viciously demanded that the guy return her a treat. Gao swung and with all his might hit the girl with his hand so that she would not take his cookies from him. Sin is angry. She told the guy displeased that even her father had never beat her. Gao quickly thought to himself that he should continue to be strict with the girl. He threatened that he would knock all the nonsense from Sin. Gao took cookies out of the box and asked the girl how old she was. The guy continued to put questions to the girl. She silently looked at him and said nothing. Gao slyly looked at the girl and promised that for the next correct answer he would give her 3 cookies. He demanded from the interlocutor to name his name. Sin very irritatedly called the main character his name Gao Fu Shui. Sin swung and grabbed the food from the hand of the protagonist and immediately began to eat it. Gao slyly told the girl that she would not eat cookies at once. The protagonist slyly looked at the girl and invited her to name the first stanza from a fairy tale about the fountain of a flowering peach. Sin asked the guy with displeasure, "What kind of fairy tale about the fountain of a flowering peach?" Gao explained to the interlocutor with a dissatisfied voice that this fairy tale was read in high school. She should know at least the first stanza. The guy told the guy in a satisfied voice that he was very unfair that he was asking questions. The girl grabbed the frightened protagonist by the clothes and shouted that now she herself would ask him questions. Sin began to use cookies from the box. She angrily asked the guy when she has a birthday and what is her beloved animal. The protagonist showed his hand forward and viciously asked the girl, "What is her name?" Sin answered in detail all the questions of the protagonist. She even answered the guy correctly about the question about the capital of Denmark. Gao grabbed a box with treats from the girl's hands. He told her that she could not answer the wrong question correctly. At this time, someone knocked on the door and demanded that Sin open the door as soon as possible. Gao looked at his watch and realized that his time had come out. Gao went to the door and grabbed the handle. He told the girl that he was interested in communicating with her. Suddenly, the door opened. The man with excitement told the guy to stop and would not leave. Sin complained to her father in displeasure that the guy mocked her. She wanted Gao to stay in the room until she avenges. The protagonist turned in surprise and asked the girl, "Is he really needed to stay?" Sin in response nodded in the affirmative. Shai said with a smile that his daughter asked the teacher Gao to stay. He did not hope that such a day would come. The main character was delighted that he was asked to stay. He thought that if he was called the teacher Gao, this means that he passed. She looked with a smile at the protagonist and invited him to stay a little to eat. Gao looked at the man and explained that he needed to go to another job in the afternoon. The owner with a smile told the butler to lead the guest to the exit. Lu showed the guy with his hand to the exit. The main character asked for forgiveness for anxiety. Suddenly, the girl called the protagonist. He stopped near the exit. Sin swung and threw a small pink bag in her hands goodbye to the guy. The girl looked out of the door and told the main character that she had given a bag for him. Gao extended his hand to the side with great excitement and thanked the girl. The little mistress turned displeasedly and headed for her room. The main character was driving in an expensive car in the back seat along the road. Gao held a bag in his hands. He asked the driver, where can he buy the same cookies? Lu will explain to the guy that the delicacy was made by a famous Swiss confectioner named Dater Müller. Cookies are produced by limited edition. They cannot be bought in ordinary stores. Lu explained to the surprised chief hero that each cookie costs $450. An ordinary student will not be able to afford them. The protagonist began to count himself in dismay to himself, how much money he had just ate a girl's visit. Gao got out of the car. He thanked the servant and wished him a happy return journey. Gao walked along the road with a bag in his hands. He remembered that he had not yet paid for the repair of a car for the daughter of the director of Bai. Suddenly, the main character heard before himself the sound of a car directly. A red car stopped in front of him. Gao asked the girl in displeasure, what does she want from him? He shouted that he was now at 0. Bai from the driver's place told the guy to shut up and gets into her car. The main character, frightened, asked the girl where she wanted to take him away. Bai looked at the guy very displeased. She was unpleasant because of his words. The driver from the car displeasedly told the guy that she just wanted to bring him to the company. The girl turned in a car and rushed aside. She shouted to the main character that he could leave on the minibus. Gao looked after the girl with displeasure and showed her tongue. He shouted that she was a fool. Bai suddenly stopped abruptly on a car and prepared to turn around. The main character was surprised to notice how the red car turned in front of him. Gao stood on the road, and at that time a car drove up to him and braked sharply. Bai stopped abruptly in front of the guy and viciously demanded that he getting into the car. The main character was scared. He excitedly asked the girl, why should he sit down to her? The driver explained to the main character that her father said to bring him. Gao smiled and told the girl that, at the direction of the director, he will listen to her and go with her. The girl told the guy displeased that he just wanted to get free. At this time, the car stopped near the sidewalk. The main character entered the company's building. The secretary told the guy to sign the document. After that, the guest had to report about the entire manager of the creative department. The main character went inside the personnel department. He remembered that he still had cookies from the girl. Gao stood near the wall. He thought displeasedly that the girl Bai simply landed him near the main entrance and left. The protagonist remembered the words of the driver. She strictly demanded that he do not talk to her so at ease in the company anymore. The guy walked along the corridor. He went to the door and knocked on it. Gao loudly said that he had come with a report. Inside the office, a Bai at the table was sitting. She demanded that the employee go and redo the report. Gao went into the office and looked at the worker with blonde hair in surprise. Gao said with a smile that he had come with a report. He asked where the manager is. The girl answered the manager that she was in front of him. The employee once again repeated to the guy that she was she. The main character was angry. He still could not understand where the manager was in front of him. Bai looked joyfully at the guy and said that in their company he should start with the bottom. The manager viciously told the main character that he would be responsible for cleaning the entire department. Gao was surprised to point to the girl. He could not believe that she was sending him to work as a cleaner. The girl looked angrily at the guy and laughed very displeasure. Gao felt as if they were discriminated. He imagined that he would have to work as a cleaner. The main character asked the girl displeasedly, did they really start in the company with the work of the cleaner? Bai in response slyly smiled at the guy and explained that all this is certainly not so. The girl explained to the chief hero that he had to be taught first. Therefore, he will start with the bottom. At this time, there was a knock on the door. A guy with flowers came in and greeted Shuei. Bai told the displeased chief hero that he could leave and start work. They needed to discuss something with Li's manager. Cao said goodbye to the Bai manager with a broken and braided voice. When the protagonist left, he looked at Li's manager with an evil look. Gao closed the door behind him. Did the girl ask who was just in her office? The main character stood near the manager's room. He told himself that he needed to concentrate. Gao went into the room of the cleaners. He put on a white cap and took a broom in his hand. The woman behind the protagonist asked the protagonist if the manager Bai sent him here. The woman with a smile told the guy that her name is Van, and she is responsible for this place. The main character answered the employee that she could call him a baby Gao. Van with a smile told the new employee that her granddaughter was also studying at the University of Tsinghua. The woman with a smile told the main character that in a couple of days, the Bai manager would definitely increase him. Gao with a smile explained to the interlocutor that he would hope for it. Van took the broom in her hands. She told the guy that this is his first day and she would clean the department. Gao with excitement told the woman that the young should work more. The guy held in his hands cleaning tools and a bucket in his hands. He told the woman that she could leave everything on him. The protagonist went to the office with employees. He put a bucket on the floor and began to wash everything around. Gao waved his hand to the workers and greeted them. He wished them a good day. Suddenly, someone said to the side of the surprised main character that he hacks on the first day. The manager Lee, in a dissatisfied voice, told the guy that he either does not want to work or he was not satisfied with the contract with the company. The office workers were very surprised and frightened. They silently looked at the manager. Lee looked at the protagonist with a dissatisfied and vicious look. Gao silently looked at him in response. Gao looked thoughtfully in front of him. He did not understand what the manager Lee wanted from him. The main character looked at the manager displeasedly. Lee stood in front of the guy and viciously studied his gaze. After a small pause, the manager told the main character that he could leave if he does not want to work. Gao looked at the manager and said in a displeased voice that he was distracting him from work. Lee was very angry. He asked the guy, "What did he say now?" The main character, with a mop in his hands, angrily answered the manager that he could leave here. Was he angrily looked at the protagonist and asked what department he was from? He demanded that the guy call his boss. Gao looked strictly at the manager and said that he would call his mother. Gao in all directions began to wave a mop to drive the manager out of the room. Lee is very angry. Lee grabbed the telephone pipe and called to security. He demanded that the protagonist be thrown out of here. Gao looked angrily at the manager and asked, "What did he say?" With all his might, he knocked out a mop on the floor. The office workers were very scared and surprised. They looked in amazement at the cleaner. The main character extended forward a mop. He told the manager in an evil voice that he could not just throw him. Ob explained in an evil voice for Lee that this was his territory and demanded that the manager get out of here. The guards ran into the room. One of them scaredly asked the manager if he was all right. Lee turned around and scaredly ran aside. He shouted to the main character that he would fire him anyway. Gao sighed in relief. At this time, other surprised employees stood behind him. Gao stood silently with a mop in his hands. At this time, one guy came up behind him. The joyful worker clutched the protagonist behind the neck by the neck. The employee viciously told the main character that he was very cool. He grabbed him from behind. At this time, women's steps were heard along the corridor. Bai looked into the room and saw that there everyone congratulated the protagonist. Office workers all together threw Gao up. They were glad that he had driven a problem manager. Employees in office were frightened when they saw that the girl had come. They threw the guy to the floor and dispersed around. Bai went to the frightened main character and strictly demanded that he rise and follow her. The manager shouted to the main character so that he immediately went to his office. The guard told the guy in a joyful voice so that he would not worry and everything will be in order. Gao in the office came up behind the girl and asked what problems? B turned to the main character and in a displeased voice asked why he was talking like this with a higher boss. Gao explained that the manager first began the conflict. He even wanted to cut him off properly. Bai explained to the main character that he is an ordinary worker in the company. At the same time, respect for the elders is appreciated above all. Gao explained to the interlocutor with a gambling voice that the leadership could not do anything without ordinary employees. Bai asked the guy in dismay, "Why did he talk to her like that?" The main character near the entrance told the girl that he had come here to work. He does not want to watch a couple boast of his love. Bai looked displeased at the guy and asked who he called a couple. Ho explained to the interlocutor that he was not worried about her attitude. He promised to pay her money a little for repairs. The main character near the exit told the girl not to create problems for him anymore. Gao left the room and slammed the door behind him. Bai turned to the side with displeasure and thoughtfully, Gao remembered that he was also unpleasant to listen to the manager. He decided that he would only do what he should do. One of the employees put his hand on the shoulder of the protagonist. He said that he was doing well. Gao looked at Jun in surprise. The main character asked the guy, "Does the manager work here in this company?" Jun thoughtfully explained to the guy, or that he was holding a post even higher than the manager of Bai. Perhaps even Lee fell in love with the manager Bai, Cao said with the excitement of the guy, or something could not fire him for no reason. Suddenly, a man with glasses appeared on the side. He told the guy that he would not have thought so. Jun pointed his hand to the man and said that it was Mr. Tu Gao. The man with excitement said that the father of the manager Lee is one of the members of the board of directors. The main character was scared. He realized that the manager Lee could put on a manager Bai through his father. Zhong explained to the main character that people in this society are very vengeful and evil. Sometimes it is best to restrain emotions in yourself. He looked joyfully at the frightened hero. He said that the guy today got rid of annoying leaflets. One of the workers grabbed the protagonist from behind and said that they should treat him for this. Zhang shouted cheerfully that the drink will be at his expense. The next day, the main character woke up in his room. He got up on the bed and said in a dissatisfied voice that he drank a lot yesterday and his head was cracking. Gao remembered yesterday's funny booze. He thought rather to himself that his acquaintance with his colleagues was just excellent. The student was surprised to tell the main character that he sees his back. Gao turned around and said in a joyful friend to his friend that he fascinated someone and someone could not stop taking pictures of him. Gao ran to the laptop and shoved his friend aside. He was interested to look at his photo. On the internet, someone posted a video. On it, an ordinary cleaner drove the manager using a mop. Gao was very surprised when he saw such a video. The protagonist began to wave his hands scared in all directions. He told a friend that he was not on the video. The student sternly told his friend that the back on the video looks exactly like his. He demanded that Gao tell him in detail about everything that happened. Gao ran up at all speeds. He shouted to a friend that he urgently needed to go on an internship. The main character came to work. He greeted Aunt Van. The woman with a smile told the guy that he came early today. Gao explained with a smile to the cleaner that he had no classes today and he came earlier. Van asked the guy, did he really quarrel with the manager yesterday? The main character smiled at the woman and confirmed that this could be so to speak. Van smiled and said in a dissatisfied voice for the protagonist that young people should restrain everything in themselves. The cleaning lady told the guy that if the manager causes him more problems, he should just admit his mistakes and apologize. Van turned and told the guy that she would show him where he would clean up today. The main character looked aside and noticed the girl. She gestured to him to be silent. Bai gestured to the guy to go to her. She wanted to tell him something. Bai slyly showed a surprised guy that she had an urgent business for him. Gao looked at the woman and realized that he had nowhere to go and have to go with her. The main character near the entrance said in a cunning voice for a woman that he needs to go uphill. Van answered the guy that he could go. Gao ran into the office and asked the girl with displeasure, "What does she want?" Bai looked angrily at the guy and informed him that the manager Li was already in the office. The girl in a dissatisfied voice told the main character that she would not spend her time solving his problems. Bai handed a small document to the surprised guy. She said he had a day off today. He should avoid danger. The girl turned and headed for the exit. She told the surprised guy with a dissatisfied voice that he forces her every day to worry. Gao grabbed a piece of paper. He decided to himself that he would not run away with a tight tail. Bai stopped in surprise. She heard behind herself the sound of a torn piece of paper. Gao thanked the surprised girl for her care. The manager looked at him silently. The main character took the mop in his hands and informed the girl about his problems. Gao headed further along the corridor. He shouted goodbye to the girl that he would solve his problems himself. The main character approached the door. He heard the manager through the door said that the team should have a good atmosphere. The guy stood and listened carefully. Lee said in a dissatisfied voice that no one should ruin the team spirit. Lee sat at the table next to the guard. He viciously asked where the cleaner went. The workers stood in a whole group and carefully, silently listened to the manager Lee. The manager looked angrily at his subordinates and said that he would now fire them all. Workers were very unhappy. At this time, the main character opened the door. Gao viciously explained to the manager that he is the only one who should quit now. Lee looked at the protagonist with interest and said that he had hidden due to fear. The manager angrily pointed to the protagonist with his finger and said that he had violated the disciplinary rule. Gao calmly dried the manager and prepared to answer something for him. The main character sternly told the manager that he was returning to avenge the destruction of the reputation. Gao looked at the frightened guy near the guard. He said that he was afraid because he could have beaten him. The main character looked with surprise at the manager and jokingly called him very cool. Lee is very angry. He shouted to the guard to immediately take the protagonist to the security department. The guard viciously approached the guy and said that he would move aside with him. The man held out his hand to the main character and called him a younger brother. Gao held out his hand forward and grabbed the guard's hand in time. Gao held a man's hand and strictly reminded him that he himself did not show strength. The guard got angry. He felt that the main character grabbed him and he could not escape. Gao grindly turned the man's hand to the side and said that he was not a harmless calf. The main character turned around and prepared to hit the guard with all his hand in the head. From the side, the girl ran into the office and shouted to everyone to stop. Gao was surprised to turn aside. Bai ran into the office and viciously shouted to everyone to stop. The guard was very frightened after a blow from the protagonist. The glasses on his face split. Gao stood and looked at the girl near the entrance. Bai demanded displeasure from the workers to calm down. Gao held out his hand to the side of the frightened guard. The main character came close to the manager. Li scaredly deviated to the side. The main character approached the frightened manager. Did the guy ask the guy with a trembling voice? What did he want? Li lay in fright near the wall. He demanded a trembling voice so that the guy would not approach him. The main character stood near the manager and looked at him angrily. He was silent. The main character viciously asked the manager, "Where are they now?" Li very scaredly answered the guy that he knows very well. Why? The main character held out his hand to the manager and demanded that he speak. Li looked scared at the guy and shouted to him that they were in the creative department. The main character asked the guy what his position is. Li answered that he was a sales manager. Gao viciously asked him what he forgot here. Gao asked the manager with displeasure, "Why did he come to the creative department?" Li was very angry. He looked displeased at the protagonist. Gao looked angrily at the manager and squeezed his hand with all his might. The main character with all his might hit the wall with his hand. Li scaredly turned away. In the wall, after a blow from the guy, there was a strong dent. Gao demanded from the manager to get lost as soon as possible. The girl ran into the office. She viciously shouted to the workers to stop. Bai angrily shouted to his subordinates to stop driving a fool. Gao turned around and viciously asked the girl who was lying around here. Bai looked displeased at the protagonist and said nothing. She decided not to stop him. Gao looked at the frightened manager and promised that his fist would no longer miss. Gao headed for the exit. The security guard in dismay asked the manager if he was all right. Li at full speed ran to the exit. The guard rushed at the manager and demanded that he wait for him. Gao stopped. He scaredly thought that the manager ran to complain to the higher authorities. The main character scaredly decided that this time he can really dismiss him. Gao turned around and explained to the employees that they should pretend that nothing had happened. They can continue to work. Bai looked at the protagonist with great excitement and called him by name. Zhang, along with his colleagues, looked after the departing main character. That very joyful voice thanked the protagonist for everything. The main character shagalled to the exit. He told himself displeasedly that a little desire could not be fulfilled. The guy shouted angry that for some reason everything ends just like that. The main character sadly went into the corridor. He told himself that everything is very terrible. The main character approached the entrance to college. He saw a girl with a book near the gate. The guy looked at his hand in surprise and noticed a deep cut in her. At this time, someone called him on the side. The student slyly pointed to the guy with her hand and said that she thought as if he were a real senpai. Gao asked his friend Lulu with great surprise, "What is she doing here?" Lula asked a surprised guy, "What happened here?" The girl looked with excitement at the protagonist, said that he looks a little pale. A girlfriend put a hand to the guy's head and asked, "Was he really have a heat?" Gao answered the interlocutor that he did not think that he had heat. He felt that his heart was rapidly pounding. Lula was frightened and excited, indicated to the main character that his hand was injured. The girl with excitement told the main character that he had blood from his hand. Gao looked at the girl with surprise and explained that he accidentally hit something. The girl with excitement told the main character that she would now give him a patch. Gao replied that he did not need anything. Lula joyfully shouted to the guy that she found what she needed. She handed him a patch. Lula told the guy that he was very clumsy and reminded him of the wound. The girl looked suspiciously at the guy and said that he received the wound in a fight. Lula stuck a patch on the hands of the protagonist. She asked him, "Was he really not fought with anyone?" Gao shouted in fear and pain. Lula looked at the guy and said with suspicion that he really had a fight with someone. Gao, as if nothing had happened, explained to the interlocutor that he was at home all night and was busy studying. He accidentally cut his hand on the table. Lula told the guy displeased that he did not convince her at all. The main character with a smile told the girl that he would go to the hostel and sleep. After that, it will quickly recover. The girl looked after the main character and said that it would be the way he would say. Gao smiled at the girl and showed her a heart. He promised to treat her to dinner. The girl was delighted. She agreed with the proposal of the protagonist. Lula went to the guy and asked if he would be free tomorrow. The girl invited the main character to go shopping with her. Gao, with excitement, thought that this could be an invitation to a date. The main character scaredly asked the girl, "Will they really need to go shopping?" Lula said that she wanted to go to the cinema tomorrow with Van In. But her girlfriend cannot go herself. She already bought tickets and everything else. The girl asked the protagonist, could he go with her? Gao was very happy. He shouted with great pleasure to the girl that he would go with her. The student told the main character in response that all this is wonderful. Lula waved her hand and said, that tomorrow morning they will meet in the same place at 8 hours. Gao shouted very joyfully to the girl that he was very waiting for a meeting with her. At this time, the phone rang in the pocket of the protagonist. He reached for the tube. Gao picked up the phone and asked displeasedly who was calling it to him. The girl held the phone in her hands and was silent. She waited for the guy to tell her. Bai introduced herself to the guy on the phone. The main character was scared. He thought that the girl called to inform him of the dismissal. Bai asked the protagonist on the phone, "Where is he now?" The interlocutor asked the guy, "Is he all right?" The main character replied that he was fine. He walked along the road. Gao walked along the path and kicked in small stones. He explained to the girl that he did not want to bother her. Bai reminded the main character so that he would not be late for work on Monday. The main character scaredly thought that if he was invited to work on Monday, it means that he was not fired. Bai on the phone told the main character that the company knows about the situation with Lee's manager, the director, to take care of all this. The girl told the main character that the director was held accountable for his actions. The main character with excitement on the phone thanked the manager Bai. The girl on the phone told the main character that she had to stop the manager Lee before. The main character began to scream the girl that he was fine. He said goodbye to her. The guy was surprised to think that the girl even apologized to him. The protagonist was delighted that he was not fired. He felt like a winner. Gao was happy to think that the president of the company turned out to be a respected person. The protagonist joyfully imagined that he would put on a festive suit to meet a girl tomorrow. Gao walked and joyfully sang various funny songs to himself. He felt that life was beautiful. The main character walked along the street in a festive outfit. He was ready for a date with Lula. The guy looked joyfully on the phone. He thought that everything was happening, as if in his dreams. Suddenly, the girl approached the guy on the side and called the protagonist. Lula went to the guy and asked for forgiveness for being late. Gao noted that the girl was very beautiful. The guy smiled at the student and said that he had just come. He felt that he was smiling involuntarily. Lula invited a friend to hurry to the cinema. The film was supposed to begin soon. The guy joyfully answered her that they were coming. The main character thought joyfully that he would take the opportunity and kiss the girl. The main character was sitting next to the girl in the cinema for neighboring chairs. Gao looked at his girlfriend on the side. She stared at the screen. The main character took a deep breath. He realized that he should use such a moment for himself. Gao looked at his girlfriend on the side and realized that he had to grab her hand now. The guy held out his hand to the girl's hand. He saw that she was completely open. At the last moment, Lula abruptly pulled her hand to the side. Gao grabbed her chair. The main character disappointedly turned away. He was unhappy due to the fact that the girl removed her hand. Gao looked at his girlfriend and with fright noticed that she had just decided to straighten her hair. The protagonist thought displeasedly that he had failure like a hero of a romantic comedy in the manga. The girl corrected her hairstyle and held out her hand back to the armrest of the chair. Gao was very amazed when he saw that the girl laid her hand on top of his hand on the chair. The girl sat and looked calmly aside. The main character followed her with attention. Gao, with great excitement and intrigue, looked at the girl's hand on his hand. The girlfriend raised her hand on the guy's hand and abruptly turned her over. Lulu tightly took up her fingers by the hand of a surprised protagonist. Gao was very happy. He thought to himself that today the goddess of love was patronized. After watching the film, the main character, along with a girlfriend, went out into the corridor. He looked with interest at her side. Gao walked and held the girl's hand. He did not know if he should admit to her. The guy glanced joyfully to the side and noticed his mother and daughter near the ice rack. Gao turned and offered a girlfriend to take 2 ice cream for them. Lulu answered him in dismay that it was not worth doing this. The main character turned to the side and told the girl joyfully that he would return quickly. The seller handed the main character to the bank with a drink. The girl at this time turned away. Lula informed the guy on the phone that they would see later. The main character handed the girl a glass and asked if she agreed to meet someone. Lula answered with a smile that she had not agreed with anyone. A girlfriend turned to a guy. He looked at her inquiringly and with excitement. Lula looked at her friend and said in a displeased voice that she was a little tired. Lula grabbed her friend's arm and invited him to return as soon as possible. Gao suspiciously turned to the side. He noticed that the girl behaved very strangely. At this time, a stranger in a suit appeared on the side. He called a frightened girl. Lula very sharply immediately removed her hand to the side of the hands of the protagonist. The stranger took off his glasses. He looked angrily and carefully at the girl. A guy with long and red hair asked the girl with interest to introduce him to her friend. Gao was surprised to think to himself that the girl called a friend to the specialty here. Lula displeasedly explained to the guy that next to her was not her boyfriend, just a friend. The main character was very excited. He looked at his girlfriend with displeasure and fright. The stranger looked at the girl and demanded that she tell the truth. Lula was very worried. She said in an exciting voice that everything was not so. The main character decided that the girl was shy and he wanted to help her with this. Gao held out his hand to the stranger and explained that he was ordinary friends with the girl. The guy looked at the protagonist with interest and great distrust. The stranger put his hand on the protagonist and explained that the girl called only one of him. Gao turned into a stranger in displeasure. He did not understand why his girlfriend called them on the same day. The stranger approached the girl and said that they had not seen her for a long time. Gao looked at the side of his girlfriend and realized that he was a reserve option for her. Lula and his friend looked good together. The main character decided that he should leave, even if he did not want to. Gao told a girlfriend with a guy that if they met, then he will leave. The stranger turned around and told the main character that they would not see each other later. Gao answered the guy with a smile that they would still see himself. Mentally, he said goodbye to the girl. The stranger invited his girlfriend to move to the cafe nearby. Lula took the phone in her hands. She asked a friend, could she call first? The guy agreed to her. Lula took the phone in his hands and called his girlfriend named Nini. The main character approached the entrance to the university hostel. He thought about unhappy love. At this time, some stranger called the guy from behind. He stopped. Gao turned around and picked up the run-up girl under the arms. It was neither. The student shouted to the guy that she was apologizing. She explained that all this was her idea. She explained to the main character with excitement that Lula, along with her classmate, had been like each other for a very long time. She explained with excitement to the main character that she could not look at Lula and her classmate for a long time. The main character guessed. He told the girl that Lula called him on a date to inspire another guy. Neither in fright bowed in front of the guy and shouted that everything had happened because of her. Gao put his hand on the student's shoulder and explained that everything was in order. The protagonist explained that he was simply used, and he, like a fool, came across it. Gao stepped aside. He shouted to the girl that they seemed to have never met before. At this time, someone called the main character and offered to go to drink. The car stood on the side and Bai heard all this. Bai could not understand why the main character went to drink in the daytime. The main character woke up the next morning after a strong hangover. He remembered joyfully that he set up an alarm clock so as not to oversleep the work of the tutor. Gao thought displeased to himself that he was going to work with a broken heart and with a hangover. The protagonist was surprised to notice how the manager Bai on the street said goodbye to some girlfriend. Bai turned into displeasure and looked with interest at the protagonist. The manager asked the guy with interest why did he woke up so early after a booze. Gao was very scared. He asked the girl why she was standing in the morning near his college. The protagonist shouted displeasedly to the girl that she was pursuing him. Bai laughed in displeasure. She was amused by the guy's behavior. The manager told the guy that she was in the evening classes yesterday. She accidentally heard that he would go to a booze. Gao was surprised to ask the interlocutor about yesterday's classes. The main character came to the head. He shouted to the girl that she had not even released. Bai strictly explained to the guy that she is a teacher at the Faculty of Business. Gao shouted displeasedly to the interlocutor so that she retained her image of the teacher. The main character felt that he was painful, but there is something more important. Gao asked the interlocutor if she has a minute. The girl asked him what he wants. The main character opened the door and got into the car. He told the girl to throw him to the right address. Bai answered him displeased that she was not a taxi driver. Bai rode in a car and talked with a girlfriend. He proved to her with excitement that he was a private tutor, not a cleaner. Bai brought the protagonist to the right address and threw him out of the car. She reminded him that he would not be late for work. Gao lay on the ground. He said in a dissatisfied voice to himself that the girl is very frank. The main character got to his feet. He thought that the girl is a good person. She didn't want to use it just like that. The guy stopped and told himself that it is important for him to earn more money. Gao pointed his hand to the side and said that the money would make him happy. The main character shouted to the girl to be ready for his hellish lesson. He imagined as if Sin was very scared in anticipation of his arrival. The butler greeted the protagonist and invited him to go. The man informed the girl that Mr. Gao had come. The student went to the door and gently opened it. She looked at the guy with distrust. Sin looked pretty at the protagonist and said that he could go inside. Gao with a smile noted to himself that only a couple of days passed, and the girl became even more beautiful. Sin displeasedly told the chief hero so that he sat down somewhere as soon as possible. Gao realized that he had a very difficult child in front of him. The main character took the book in his hands and invited the girl to start a lesson as soon as possible. Gao looked at the girl in surprise. He realized that she was ready to study. Sin lay on the bed and looked cunningly at the guy. She held a book in her hands. Gao explained with a smile to the interlocutor that the lesson had begun. He will be her teacher, and she is his student. Sin looked angrily at the guy and said that he had come here for the sake of money. She invited him to eat delicious ones and drink a seagull. As a result, the guy will make money and she will also be in the plus, Gao thought. He realized that Mr. Liu believed in him and he could not let him down. Sin looked at the protagonist with surprise. He took her book from her hands. The main character slyly told the girl that he would give her a book only after the lesson. The student screamed angrily that she does not want to study. The girl threatened the guy that she would press her father and would be fired. Gao invited the girl to argue. If she wins, he will leave right away. Sin angrily looked at the protagonist and shouted that she agreed to argue with him. Gao slyly looked at the student. The girl thought that all this was some kind of trick. The protagonist looked at the girl slyly and said that he would offer her something now. Gao explained to the student that she could never do what he wants. The main character told the girl that she should join the right side of the body to the wall and raise her right leg. The student laughed very loudly. Gao looked at her with amazement. The girl with a smile told the main character that she could do such a simple thing. The rules of the leg to the wall, she said with a smile to the guy that he could start collecting things. The protagonist looked angrily at the girl and said that they would still look who would win. The girl joyfully told the guy that she could complete his task. Gao slyly smiled at the interlocutor and said that she could start. Gao took the cup in his hands. He told the girl with a smile that she could try as much as she wants. But the result will not change. Sin tried to stand near the wall, but all the time fell. Gao asked her with interest if she finished. The student fell to the ground and shouted displeased that she was painful. Sin looked displeased at the guy and shouted so that he would not look at her. The student strictly demanded from the guy to turn away. Gao looked aside. The main character cunningly suggested that the girl again try to complete the task. Sin looked displeased at the guy and shouted that he had deceived her. Gao spread his hands to the side. He told the girl that he did not promise her that it could be easy to do. Sin angrily and displeasedly turned to the side. The main character decided to explain everything to her. Gao explained to the girl with a drawing details about the displacement of the center of gravity in a person. The main character stroked the girl on the head and said that the lack of knowledge could easily let her down. The main character handed the girl a piece of paper with the dough. He said that he himself prepared him for her. Sin sharply bounced to the side. She shouted to the protagonist that she hates tests. Gao handed the girl a sheet and said that she was easy to cope with the test. The main character shouted to the girl that she herself asked for and should not blame him for rudeness. Gao swung big and demanded that the frightened girl perform a test. Sin sat down at the table. She told the guy with a displeased voice that he only knows how to offend. The girl sat in the room and continued to perform the test. She shouted that all this is very difficult for her. Sin brushed her hands to the side at the table and shouted that she could no longer. The main character took a piece of paper in his hands. He told the girl that he would look at her test. The guy carefully looked at the piece of paper and was very angry. Gao angrily shouted to the girl that she painted a pig on a leaflet. He tried very hard when he was preparing a senior for her. Sin sat and quietly, innocently smiled. She turned her head to the side. The main character grabbed a broom in his hand. He shouted to the girl that it was impossible with her in a good way. Sin in dismay asked the guy, what was he going to do? Gao swung a broom and shouted to the girl that he would be cruel now. After the blow, the student fell to the floor. The main character threatened her that he would hit her again if she cried again. Gao viciously demanded that the girl get up and make a test. To himself, he thought that he needed to continue further until the girl changes herself. Sin sat and looked at the guy offended. She pulled her hand to her face to wipe the tears. Suddenly, the student told the teacher a confident voice that she would make a test. Sin sat at the table and wrote a test. The main character stood nearby and carefully watched. Gao looked joyfully at the student and thought that she had seriously reacted to the test. At this time, a big clock rang on the wall. Time for the test is over. The girl handed the main character a piece of paper and said that she had a test. Sin grabbed joyfully by the leaf. He shouted to the girl that he would check everything now. Gao carefully checked the test. He told the girl that all this was difficult, but she coped. Gao explained in detail to the girl where she was mistaken in the test. Sin, and the excitement replied to him that she had just forgotten something. The main character carefully looked into the sheet and prepared to call the girl the result. Gao joyfully lifted the sheet up and shouted to the girl that she scored 65 points. The student asked with surprise and excitement if she passed the test. Gao stroked the girl on the head and said in a joyful voice that she could do it. The main character thought joyfully that the method of whip and gingerbread works for such problematic girls. Sin thought very joyfully and cunningly to herself that she had a test. Gao looked at the student with attention. She wanted to tell him something. The student cunningly told the main character that she had now received a chance to take revenge. Gao was very scared and became worried when he heard from the girl about revenge. The main character turned around and told the girl that she should have the ability to take revenge. Sin raised her finger up and said that she first passed a test of the level of high school. Gao thought to himself that the girl should not be proud that she for the first time passed the test. He did not want the student to learn about his low grades. Sin looked at the protagonist with displeasure from behind and called him a swindler. Gao looked at the student with displeasure. He grabbed the broom and hit it. Sin screamed very loud displeasedly. She covered her face with her hands. The main character asked the girl if he was still satisfied with the broom in his hands. Sin scaredly looked at the guy and tried to make excuses in front of him. The little mistress scaredly shouted to the guy that she would bring a first aid kit. Sin went to the main character and began to process the wound on his hand. Sin approached the surprised teacher and asked him for forgiveness. Gao was surprised when he heard that the girl had just called him a teacher. The guy smiled at the student and explained with a smile that he was also wrong. Sin thought silently and looked at the protagonist. She did not tell him anything. The girl shouted to a friend that she would go now and remove the first aid kit. She ran to the side. Sin washed and stumbled at full speed on slippers. She fell to the floor. The student fell and dropped the first aid kit. The guy grabbed her in time. Gao grabbed the girl in his arms and asked with surprise if she was in order. Sin opened her eyes and looked in surprise at the guy. Gao silently looked at her. Suddenly, the student closed her eyes. The main character looked at her in dismay. Gao, with excitement, thought to himself that the girl showed him a signal to the beginning of the action. The main character stretches closer to the girl to kiss her. Sin opened her eyes and very frightenedly called the surprised teacher. Gao grabbed his head with his hand. He remembered that he was just a teacher for the girl. The main character told the girl that the classes are over today. Gao looked at the girl and said that he would adjust the lesson plan for her according to her results. The main character promised the student that next time he would buy her several textbooks. Sin ran up to the guy and grabbed his hand by the clothes to stop. The student looked at the teacher. She really wanted to go with him for textbooks. The main character explained to the girl that he would be free only on Monday next week. She should be at school at this time. Sin, in a thoughtful voice, explained to the teacher that she had not gone to school for a long time. Sin looked with a prayer at the guy and asked him to take her with him. The main character displeasedly explained to the student that they would go to a bookstore nearby. Sin smiled joyfully for the protagonist and said that he was the best. The main character walked along the street in the evening. He told himself that he was very tired. The guy noticed that there were many people near the building. He realized that the hall was very crowded. Liu appeared on the side. He greeted the protagonist with a smile. Gao asked his friend displeasedly, "Why are there so many people in the audience?" Liu said with a smile the main character that they could go and look at the annual beauty contest. Gao said in surprise that he was so busy that he did not pay attention to what was happening in college. Liu Kitro told his friend that Lin Lulu also wanted to participate in the competition. The main character turned into displeasure and repeated to himself the name Lin Lulu. Liu invited the guy to go to the hall. He said that they might not have enough space. The protagonist waved his hand to a friend and explained that he had sudden things. Liu pulled the frightened protagonist for his clothes. He shouted that there is nothing more important than observing beautiful girls. Xiao Kao in a blue suit entered the stage. The host shouted that this was a sort of year with the Faculty of Management. Spectators near the stage were very delighted. They shouted the words of support to different participants. Liu stood near the stage with the main character. He told him about various participants. Li Hiro whispered to his friend that the competition would win Lula from the Faculty of Business. The presenter said that a member of Lulu from the Faculty of Business enters the stage. The audience in the hall was very happy. They shouted support for the participant. Lula stood on stage in a very beautiful white outfit. All people in the hall shouted her name. Gao looked at the girl and thought that she, as always, is very beautiful. The main character turned around and went aside. Liu asked him with excitement where he was going. Liu asked the guy would he really wait for the results. Gao replied that he only wants to take a walk. Gao answered a friend that he did not want to walk. The presenter at that time announced the results of the winner. The presenter joyfully said that she won Lin Lulu. She congratulated her. The presenter said that the participant should tell them about his love. The sad main character went to the side. Lula stood near the microphone. She was shy and did not know what to tell her. Xiao went aside from the competition. He did not want to stay further. The presenter asked a frightened participant if there is anyone special in her life. Lula, in a calm voice, explained to the interlocutor that there is a person she is worried about. Lula told the surprised audience that she is in the only place where a person can hear her with a deer for her. The participant bowed and asked in a quiet voice from the older forgiveness. Gao was amazed when he heard such words from a girlfriend. He turned around with surprise to her. Liu Qido hit his friend with his hand and explained that the girl apologized to him. Gao looked aside. He explained to his friend that there was a misunderstanding and everything was already resolved. The main character told a friend that he was leaving. Liu was surprised due to the fact that the guy did not answer the girl. The main character walked in the late evening in the park. He remembered everything about the girl. Gao stopped. He thought that he was painful, but he pretends to be, as if everything was in order. At this time, someone ran to the guy from the side and called him in a frightened voice. The protagonist turned in surprise and saw that next to him was the girl Lula. Gao, with great excitement, reminded the interlocutor that the award ceremony had already ended. The girl looked at the protagonist and said that she should not lie to him. Gao stood scared in front of the girl. He understood that he had to forgive her. Lula looked at the guy and asked him not to ignore her. The main character looked at his girlfriend and asked her to be silent. Gao told his interlocutor that she would not say anything to him anymore. Gao looked at the girl and said that he had never avoided her. Lula asked the guy with a frightened voice, "Are they still friends?" Gao stood and hugged his girlfriend. At this time, Bai passed by and looked at him with displeasure. Bai pointed her finger to the side and demanded that the guy remove his hands from Lulu. The protagonist turned to the side in surprise. He did not expect to see Zhui Bai here. The guy suddenly raised his hands up. He shouted to the manager that he did nothing. Lula looked with interest in front of herself and greeted the teacher Bai. Bai grabbed the guy with his hand by the ear. Lula screamed, scared by the teacher, that all this was a misunderstanding. Bai said to the girl with a confident voice that her teacher was next to her. The main character, frightened, shouted to the manager that now she would tear his ear. Lula continued to assure the teacher that the guy did not offend her. The main character the next day came to work in the company. He remembered that Bai accused him of poor behavior in relation to Lulu. Therefore, he reported in the office of the guards and went to bed late. Tu went to the guy and hugged him. He invited him to jump into the restaurant with them. The main character waved his hand and said that he was busy today. He could have seen them next time. The main character approached the door of the creative manager's office. He heard someone shouted inside. Gao opened the door. He heard whether he was very maliciously molesting the girl. Bai angrily shouted to the manager so that he did not bother her without the need. Li looked at the girl in displeasure and said that he was her groom. The manager viciously explained to the interlocutor that he could visit her without the need. Bai shouted to the manager an evil voice that she would never agree to marriage. Li slyly looked at the girl and promised that they would definitely get married anyway. The main character came from the side. He said in an evil voice that he sees Li manager. Gao went into the office with a mop on his shoulder. He reminded the manager that he told him before. The main character looked angrily at the manager and said that he had met him again. Li waved his hand for the protagonist and said that he had urgent affairs in the main department. Gao turned around and told the departing manager that he was a coward. Gao turned around and told the girl that she would not thank him. He just did not like the manager, and he had not forgotten what Bai did with him last night. Bai looked angrily at the guy and explained that all this happened due to how he behaved before. Gao was very unhappy. He strictly asked the girl when he behaved badly. Bai explained to the guy that after observing him, the company decided to change something in his work. The main character thought that the director could find out about his situation and decided to fix it. Cao said in a cunning voice that he did not want to go to the security department. He is absolutely satisfied with the current work. Bai glanced angrily at the protagonist and said that they had not yet decided where to transfer him. At this time, the main character rang the phone. The manager turned to the side displeasedly. Gao greeted his student and said that he was already descending to her. Sin slyly asked the guy so that he would not force her to wait long. At this time, two very evil strangers approached the girl from behind. The bully held out his hand to the student and offered her to drink with them. Sin turned into displeasure and asked the strangers, what did they want from her? The bully viciously glanced at the girl and said that they wanted to drink with her. The schoolgirl dismissed the stranger and demanded that he do not touch her. The displeased bully told the girl that she should be grateful to him for inviting her. The stranger attacked the girl and demanded that she do not play in a short time. Sin was very scared. She screamed and wanted to close her hand from the attacker. The student swung and, with all her might, with the foot of the attacker from below in the groin. The bully received a very strong blow. He immediately twisted all in pain. One of the hooligans turned in fright and asked his friend, "Is everything in order?" Sin frightened her hand in fright and explained that she had not hit the bully, not on purpose. The leader got angry. He shouted to the bandits to grab the girl. Sin was very scared. A gang of hooligans spun around her. The main character appeared from the side. The leader at this time shouted to his subordinates that they would have fun today. Gao was very scared. He turned around and looked with excitement at his student. The main character ran up and covered the girl. He asked viciously from the attackers, "What are they doing with his student?" The girl was very delighted with the guy's arrival. She joyfully called him a teacher. Gao turned around and very joyfully promised the student that he would protect her. The leader very viciously rushed at the guy and called him a student. Gao swung with all his might and hit his foot in his stomach. Gao viciously told the beaten leader to follow his tongue. The bully looked angrily at the guy. At this time, the howl of sirens rang out on the side. The bandits turned to the side displeasedly. One of them said that the police were approaching. The hooligans were frightened. They began to run away to the side with their leadership. Gao frightenedly turned to the side. He told his girlfriend that it would be unpleasant if they are taken to the police station. The main character, along with his girlfriend, quickly ran into the bookstore to hide. Sin with admiration told the main character that he knocked out a bully with one blow. Gao explained to the girl that he had learned something from his father of a policeman. The girl explained to the main character that the hooligans themselves came up and spoke to her. Gao stroked the student on the head. He told her that the next time she just ran away from the hooligans. Gao, along with their young student, joyfully shouted that they would now buy several books. The main character stood with his girlfriend. They chose books in the store. Gao turned and informed his companion that the butler Lu would wait for her at the end of the street. The student went outside and covered herself with a book. She said that today it was hot and the butler could take her directly from this place. Gao pointed to the side and told the girl that they could go through the shopping center. "There is much cooler," Sin said in an exhausted voice that she felt as if she was melting. The main character answered a girlfriend that he was going and buying something cold for her. Gao turned around in surprise and noticed some strangers in the lane. He did not understand who it was. One of the bandits ran up and pointed a finger at the protagonist for the boss. The leader viciously asked the protagonist, "Did he really beat his fighters?" Gao pressed his girlfriend. He asked the bandits, "What do they want from him?" The boss was very angry. He accused the protagonist of hitting his brother. Gao explained to an unfamiliar bandit that he himself hit his brother. His student had nothing to do with it. The bandit took out a large baton. He shouted to the guy that he would chop off his leg with whom he hit his brother. The bully viciously pointed a finger at the guy and threatened that they would cut off his leg. Gao scaredly realized that he should come up with something now. The leader looked angrily at Gao and demanded that he do not build himself a hero. The bandit told the guy in evil voice that his brother would hit him now. Gao shouted to boss so that he would not touch his girlfriend. Gao in a strict voice told the hooligans that mind can do with him, that they would want, but they should let go of the student. Sin grabbed her friend's hand and shouted to the hooligans about money. The student screamed to the bandits that she would give them money. If only they would let them go. The leader viciously glanced at the girl and asked how much money she had. Really, only a couple of thousand? Sin screamed with displeasure to the hooligans that she was the daughter of the president of the company Lu. The main character was scared. He held out his hand to close his mouth to the girl. The leader asked the schoolgirl whether she was the daughter of Shijian Lu. The main character shouted to the bandit that he was heard. Sin shoved her companion with her hand to the side. She shouted to the bandits to leave them alone. The leader smiled angrily. Smiled and said that they should respect Miss Lu. The student joyfully told the guy that her father's name worked very well. The bully swung a club. The leader shouted to the fighters that they needed to pick up a young miss. The bully swung a huge bat and shouted to the main character to get out. Gao shoved his girlfriend aside and demanded that she get out of here. The main character put his hand forward and beat off a blow from a bully. He screamed to the student to run and would not look back. Gao stood and held in front of him. He defended himself from the impact of the bully. The protagonist swung with all his strength, hit the attacker with his hand on his head. The leader ran to the guy and viciously asked where he was looking. Gao missed a very strong blow to the head and immediately flew away. The girl was scared. The guy, after a very strong blow, fell to the ground. Gao lay on the ground without movement. He called the girl with a weakening voice. The main character shouted to her girlfriend to run. Sin rushed along the street and turned in fright. Gao was lying without movement. He saw a runaway student in front of him with a weakening and muddy look. The main character woke up at night at an abandoned factory in the suburbs. Gao was with a girlfriend in a large cage. He could not understand where they were. Gao began to look for his girlfriend. He wrapped his head to the side and saw Sin there. On the side of the captives, the kidnapper came up and viciously said that they woke up. The boss sternly told his subordinates to unleash the main hero of his mouth. The leader tore the bandage from the guy's face. Gao asked him, displeased, why did they abduct them? The boss angrily told the guy that he did not expect him to turn up such a gift. He just wanted to take revenge on his brother. The leader extended his hand to the girl's face. She was very scared. Gao looked at the man with displeasure and shouted so that he would not touch the girl. Sin was handcuffed to the pillar with the guy. The leader said that the captive costs 100 million. Gao was very angry when he heard such words from the boss. There was a frightened student next to him. The boss looked angrily at the guy and swung widely at him. The leader with all his might hit the guy with his hand and shouted that he was worth nothing. Sin was very scared. She mumbled in fright and could not shout anything. Gao, after the blow, in a calm voice and told his companion that he was in order. The leader went to the exit. He shouted to his subordinates to see the prisoners. One of the bandits approached the main character and grabbed his head. He demanded that he do not move. The kidnappers headed for the exit. One of them said that it is better to follow the hostages than to patrol with the boss. Gao untied his hands from behind. He thought that he had to pull his girlfriend and himself from here as soon as possible. The bandit told his colleague not to linger. This was an important task for them. The kidnapper turned to the side. He said angrily that it was necessary to tighten the nodes on the ropes. At this time, the phone rang on the table. A girlfriend asked the bandit Amy to buy her a branded handbag. The bandit told a girlfriend on the phone that she could buy everything she wants. He had money. Sin sat on the floor. The main character came up and grabbed her hand to help. Gao showed a gesture that the girl was silent. He wanted to help her free herself. The protagonist and the girl wanted to run away. They hit the handcuffs on the pillar. The main character was scared. He realized that the bandit had heard the noise and now he would attack them. The kidnapper was scared. He looked aside and saw that the captives wanted to escape. An angry bandit swung with a knife to hit the main character. The bandit viciously swung with a knife on the guy and shouted that he was tired of living. Gao looked at the opponent absolutely calmly. He gently retreated and set him a bandwagon. The kidnapper could not resist his feet. He immediately began to fall to the ground. The bandit with a knife fell to the ground. From his blow, his breath was erupted. Gao swung his hand and hit the kidnapper behind the head with all his might. Gao did not hold his hand by the pole and wiped sweat from his head with his hand. An unconscious bandit was lying on the side. Sin, in dismay, asked a friend, "Was the kidnapper died?" Gao grabbed a knife in his hands. He told the girl that they took the phone from them and they need to get at least a little information. Another kidnapper appeared on the side. He asked displeasedly, "What kind of noise?" The bandit was very angry when he saw that the captives wanted to escape. He shouted to them that he had just left for 1 minute. Gao rushed forward at the kidnapper with a knife in his hand. The bandit fought back with his blade. The main character swung his knee and hit the kidnapper with all his might. The bandit glanced angrily at the guy and shouted that he had forced him to do it. The kidnapper jumped and swung his blade to hit the girl. The main character, scared, shouted to the girl to be more careful. The bandit swung widely with his knife and hit the guy from the back. Sin called her wounded teacher with a very frightened voice. The schoolgirl scaredly asked the teacher, "Is he all right?" Gao thought with displeasure that he needed to quickly put an end to the bandit. The kidnapper sternly told the main character that he should obey him. Gao swung his foot very cleverly and quickly and knocked out the knife from the hand of the kidnapper. The angry protagonist swung his fist to hit the opponent. Gao hit the attacker with all his might. The bandit flew to the side. The main character looked at the bandit carefully and noticed that he was lying unconscious. Gao hugged and picked up his frightened girlfriend. She still called him a teacher. The guy answered the girl that he was fine. He asked if she had a phone. Gao asked the girl to open the card on the phone and give the device to him. The guy looked carefully at the phone. He told himself that he should do something. Gao found on the map on the phone a place where they were once on excursions with classmates. The main character looked at the map with excitement and realized that there should be an important place. Gao explained to the girl that they needed to get out of this plant. He asked her to call her father and let him talk to a man. The main character scaredly thought to himself that he could die today. Gao thought that he could not allow something to happen to his girlfriend. The main character ran away with the girl from the factory. He said on the move that in his hand is not such a deep cut. They will not be able to track bloodstains. Gao, along with their companion, went into the workshop. He told her that the best decision would be to hide with the enemy under his nose. The girl called her father. The man scaredly asked her daughter, "Is she all right?" Sin handed the phone to the teacher and shouted loudly that he was in touch. The main character told the man all the details of the incident by phone. He demanded help. Gao told the guy on the phone that they were in an abandoned factory. Nearby was a bus stop. The guy demanded that the man tell the policeman that there was an ambush. He would have lured the abductors there. Gao told a man on the phone that he needed to send an outfit to the rear exit from the Luxia mountain. Sin will come out of there. The man with excitement told the guy and the girl on the phone to be careful. Gao promised Shai on the phone that they, of course, would be careful with his girlfriend. Sin asked her friend, how would they lure the bandits to the stop? Gao asked the girl with excitement. Did she understand what to do? Gao turned around and cunningly said to the girl that they should arrange for the shutters of the show. The main character said with doubling a girlfriend that they need to find something to remove the handcuffs. The leader asked his subordinates, "Is everything ready?" The bandit answered the boss that all the ways of retreating is ready. The bandit asked the boss with interest if they would kill the hostages after receiving money. The leader strictly explained to the subordinate that they could not allow their victims to identify them. The leader answered the subordinate that he will first kill the protagonist, since he is very cunning. The leader grabbed the phone and in fright asked what was happening. The protagonist on the phone told boss that they had fled. The boss answered the guy that this was all impossible. Gao on the phone informed the kidnapper that he would definitely inform him. At this time, the guy gave a signal to the girl. Sin shouted loudly that there was a bus stop next to him. She needed to be heard on the phone. The protagonist demanded from a satisfied girl to be quieter. The kidnapper still shouted something on the phone. The main character turned off the connection. Gao told the girl with an exhausted voice that they finally did it. Sin asked the guy with great excitement, what should they do now? The main character was in the warehouse next to large boxes. He told the girl that when the bandits go to the stop, they will have to escape from the rear entrance. There they will meet with the police. The guy told himself that he had lost a lot of blood. His head was spinning and he needed to control himself. Late in the evening, a car with bandits drove up to an abandoned warehouse. Two attackers ran out from behind the car and at full speed headed into the warehouse. One of the fighters scaredly shouted to boss on the phone that their victims had fled. The fighter told the leader on the phone that he and the guys would be charged to the district. The side stood and listened to Gao. The bandit commanded his subordinates to carefully examine everything in the warehouse. Gao, along with a girlfriend, took refuge on the sidelines. The main character scaredly thought that the bandit in the warehouse would be found sooner or later. The main character quietly explained to Sin that the police should be near the mountain. They must take the initiative and do something. Gao handed the girl the phone. She will have to read the message in the notes when there will be safety. Gao turned around and immediately asked the girl, wasn't she scared? Sin smiled and promised the guy that they would arrange a party after they get out of here. The guy cunningly told the companion that she was going on a date with him as a girl. Sin displeasedly explained to the teacher that he wants to use her. The guy waved his hand to the girl and said that she could go. Sin dutifully replied that she would do so. The main character looked after the run-up student. He thought he was scared too. Gao silently tied his upper jacket in front in his stomach. The guy went to the exit of the warehouse. He thought that he should keep the girl intact. Sin ran up to the exit from the building. She carefully looked around. The girl looked around the room and thought that she had reached the place that the teacher was talking about. The student remembered that she needed to read the message now. She took out the phone. Gao took out a telephone and began to read everything carefully from it. The schoolgirl was very scared. From surprise, she dropped the device from her hands. Sin dropped the phone and he hit the floor. One of the bandits shouted that the guy was running in the direction of the warehouse. The message on the phone said that the girl had to get out of the window and run towards the park. There was a police. She had to be brought to the warehouse. Sin did not know what she needed to do now. She decided that she should believe the guy. The schoolgirl looked up the window in the wall. She decided that she had to find the police. Sin sadly thought that she had to find and bring the police here. At the same time, at the factory, the bandit swung and hit the protagonist with his foot. The leader told his subordinates to find a girl, and he wanted to finish off the guy. Gao sat on the ground after a strong blow. The protagonist was scaredly realized that he could not allow the bandits to find out that the girl had already escaped. Gao swung to hit the attacker. The bandit dodged to the side in time. The kidnapper joyfully shouted to his opponent that now his turn to beat. The bandit swung with all his might and hit the protagonist with his fist on the head. The attacker ran up behind the guy and with all his might hit him in the back. The kidnappers picked up the guy from behind and shouted that it would be his last day. The bandit ran behind the lying main character and grabbed his head by the head. Gao told himself in a strict voice that he should not lose now. The kidnapper, with all his might, hit his victim with his head against the ground on a grand scale. The bandit put his leg from behind on the guy's head and said that he hated him from the very beginning. The exhausted protagonist remembered the girl. He thought that she should be far away. Cao saw in consciousness, as if Bai Shui was very unhappy due to the fact that he was walking again. Lulu slyly looked at the guy and invited him later to take a walk in the park. The main character saw his student handed him a box with her favorite cookies. Gao decided that his last hour had come. He thought from the last forces that he was useful for girlfriends. The main character closed his eyes. He was at night in an abandoned warehouse. After a very long time feigning, the guy opened his eyes. Someone called him from the side. Gao was lying on the bed and looked up in fright. He was in the hospital. Sin asked the teacher in a frightened voice, could she ask him a couple of questions? The main character scaredly thought to himself that he knew the girl's voice next to him. Sin was near the guy's bed. She asked him, why did he leave her? Gao gratefully looked at the girl. He realized that she had met the police and they saved him. The guy carefully held out his hand and touched the girl's head. She lay with her eyes closed. Sin suddenly abruptly jumped to her feet. She called the teacher a frightened voice. The main character smiled very slyly and greeted her. Sin was very scared. She whipped sadly and called the teacher. The schoolgirl rushed to the guy and hugged him. The main character was very surprised. The girl with tears in her eyes scaredly shouted to the guy that she was worried about him. Gao held out his hand and said that he was all right. He stroked her head. The guy reassured the girl. He said that she should not cry like a child. At this time, Shi coughed on the side. He wanted young people to pay attention to him. The main character, along with a girlfriend, was surprised to look at the man in the ward. The main character sharply shoved the girl away from him. He was very scared. The man with a smile told the main character that he could just call him Lu. The man promised the guy that he would never forget, as he saved his daughter. Gao waved his hand and said with a smile that there was also his fault. Lu smiled at the main character and said that he would not be worried about anything. He promised to do everything necessary for the guy in the future. Gao asked the man with great interest, what happened to the kidnappers? Lu told the guy that the police detained all the criminals. He now has nothing to worry about. Father told my daughter that they could leave. The doctors will look after her teacher. Sin smiled goodbye to the main character and said that they would see her tomorrow. The man with his daughter went out and slammed the door. The main character looked after them. The doctor went to the guy and took his hand. Gao could not understand how many days he was disconnected. The main character turned and looked aside. He thought that this time he almost died. A nurse came up from the side. She told the patient that a friend came to him. The door of the chamber opened. The protagonist told his acquaintance that he could come in. The manager of Bai went through the open door to the ward. She was surprised when she heard the words from the guy. The girl angrily asked the protagonist, whom did he decide to call a fat man? Gao was very amazed. He asked Bai with fright, what is she doing here? The main character was in the hospital ward. The manager of Bai came to him. The girl asked the guy with displeasure, whom did he call the fat man? Gao explained to the guest that he decided, as if a friend had come to him. He asked the girl, why did she come? The girl put a fruit basket on the nightstand. She told the surprised guy that she wants to visit him. The patient thanked the guest. He said that he was unconscious for several days and could not warn anyone in the company about his absence. Bai slyly looked at the guy and said that he would focus on recovery. He should not worry about the company. Gao looked at his guest and thought that she also had a soft side. Bai brought the guy a dish with a treat and told him to eat. The main character smiled and told the girl with a plate that she did well. Bai shouted to the guy in a displeased voice that he was talking a lot. She stuffed food in his mouth. The main character shouted displeasedly to the girl to be more careful. He could open a wound. The nurse came up on the side and called the patient. The guy, along with the manager, turned to the side. The nurse with a smile told the main character that a girl came to him to visit. Gao with a piece of food in his mouth told the nurse that the guest could come in. Bai was surprised to tell the main character that she did not expect a girl to visit him. Gao, with a smile, explained to the interlocutor that he did not have a girlfriend, but there are only friends. The protagonist turned to the side in surprise. He did not expect a student to come to him. Lula greeted the protagonist and teacher Bai with excitement. The protagonist shouted in an annoyed voice from his bed so that the girl would crouch and did not stand. Lula showed the main character a box of food. She was afraid that the guy would not like hospital food. The main character looked at the girl in displeasure and silently. He did not tell her anything. Lula asked the guy with displeasure, was he still angry with her? Gao answered the girl that he was not angry. Gao looked at the student and thought that he was in love with her, but remained an ordinary friend. The girl handed the main character a large basket with various treats. Bai handed a box of food for the guy. She joyfully told him that Lulu was very good in cooking food. The student asked the guy cunningly, would he try to food or need to feed him? Bai looked slyly at the protagonist and explained that the school beauty prepared food for him. Gao took food with sticks. He scaredly thought that if he had not tried her, then something bad would happen. The patient with appetite consumed food. The nurse came in from the side and called him. The nurse informed the main character that another girl came to him. Bai listened carefully to all this. Lula looked at the entrance to the ward with great attention. She was wondering who came now. At this time, a smiling Sin ran into the room. She brought the main character a box of food. Sin looked in front of her. She was surprised due to the fact that there were some other girls next to the guy. Lula and Bai with amazement together and silently looked at the student. The main character was very scared. From excitement, he even dropped the sticks for food. The protagonist near the board said that Shulu-chan is a scene when two or more girls compete for one man. When a man retreats, all the girls will find out about each other, and then the confrontation begins. Gao was in dismay on the bed in the ward. He thought that he was really in a bad position. All girlfriends turned around and looked very displeased at the guy. They were silent. Gao looked at his girlfriends and thought with displeasure that not one of them was his girlfriend. The main character wanted to say something to his guests. He hesitated and could not choose the right words. Girlfriends began to ask the guy with great interest and excitement, what happened? Gao waved his hands in fright and shouted to his friends that nothing of the kind happened. The guy with excitement thought to himself that he was very scary, but he should restrain himself. The nurse looked into the office. She told the guy that still friends came to him. Gao thought scared to himself that it was very bad because someone else would come to him now. Two girls sat and cleaned an apple for a guy. Gao looked at them and thought that such a scene would be incorrectly understood. Gao sharply held out his hand to the side. He shouted to the girls to stop. The frightened main character felt severe pain in the body and screamed. Lula shouted displeasedly so that he would not move. Other girls were also scared. On the side came the guy Liu with a young student. They brought the patient food. The guy and the student were very surprised. They saw many girls in the ward. The girls looked at the guests with surprise. Liu frightedly said that all this was unfair. Gao shouted from his place to the girls that they should first listen to him. Cell cunningly pointed her finger to the side. Other girls looked at her with interest. Bai turned to the main character and said that he should pay more attention to the body. Sin mockingly asked the guy, how does he feel now? Lula looked at the protagonist and advised him to recover as soon as possible. Gao was very amazed when he heard such compliments from girls. Liu looked very angrily at the protagonist and considered him a traitor. Gao was very scared. He shouted to his friends to listen to him first. Liu, with the student, ran out the door. He shouted displeasedly to the chief hero that next time he would have but a bruise under his eye. All three girls were very happy. They showed each other positive gestures. Sin told the teacher that she was leaving with her companions. She wished him a good rest. The main character, sitting on the bed, told himself joyfully that the girlfriends finally left. Gao recalled with great excitement that in the past he was always alone. He lived without the help of others. Gao looked at the food on the table. He did not know before that around him could be so lively. The patient looked out the window. He thought that everyone has their own path through life. Once people will disperse and never meet again. The protagonist looked thoughtfully out the window and thought that his friends were now near. He believed that all this was still the beginning. The guy looked out the window with a no-blinking gaze. He decided that he should be worthy of his name. The main character looked joyfully in front of him and thought that all this was right. The protagonist remembered that his name was Gao Fushai. He studied at the Faculty of Theoretical Physics of the Tsinghua College. The guy tied the laces on the sneakers after he was hospitalized for a month. As a result, he was discharged ahead of schedule. The guy went to the college gate. He did not want to rest anymore and he wanted to see his acquaintances. The girls greeted the protagonist and congratulated him on recovery. Girlfriends began to visit the protagonist together. This all could bring him to the grave. After a couple of days, the main character sat at a lecture in the hall. He still had to go in the hospital for medicines. Gao looked at the familiar student in the schoolroom. He did not understand how Lula entered their older group. At work, manager Bai approached the main character. She demanded that he put the mop and rest. He still has not completely recovered. Nevertheless, something has changed for the protagonist. He sat at the girl's house and held a cup in his hands. Sin finished writing tasks. After that, she threw the handle to the side. The student looked at the guy displeased and told him that she was tired of writing. The main character with a cup in his hands asked the girl, "What's the matter?" Sin said displeasedly at the guy with her fingers said that he was just sitting and drinking tea with delicious ones. Gao turned the book and shouted to the girl that she could take a break. He still checks what she did. Sin looked at the protagonist and invited him to play together. Gao answered the student that they could not play. The guy explained to the girl that the man hired him a tutor and spent a bunch of money on this. Sin angrily fell on the bed and shouted that she did not want to study. The main character in a calm voice invited the girl to argue how they did before. The student thought deeply. She did not know whether to agree to a dispute with the teacher. Sin angrily agreed with the guy to argue. She promised that this time she would definitely win. Gao told the girl that if she wins the dispute, he would not force her to study until the next exam. The main character, along with the girl, hit their hands. She cheerfully told him that she agreed. Gao cunningly glanced at the student and thought that there were many options, how he could make her study. The main character picked up a cookie. He slyly asked the girl what would happen if she loses. Sin was very scared. She said her opinion that after losing she would kiss the teacher. Gao was very scared and surprised when he heard such words from the girl. The guy pointed with a strict hand at the student and explained that she now could not change this bet. Sin angrily glanced at the teacher and confirmed that everything would be the way she said. The main character realized that if he wins, then she would kiss him. If Mr. Liu finds out about this, then he will kill him. Therefore, he now needs to specially lose. Gao looked at the girl and asked if she really wants to argue for it. The girl fell silent. She thought deeply and looked in front of her. Sin cunningly glanced at the teacher and said that they could already start a dispute. The main character in fright asked the girl, "What will they play?" Sin handed her hand forward. She told the guy that they would play a stone, scissors, paper. The one who wins twice from 3 parties will win. Gao was very joyful, and with excitement thought to himself that he could accidentally win. The guy thought to himself that he could adjust his move to the girl and specially lose. He told her out loud that they were starting. The main character looked at the student and said that they were starting at the expense of 3. The main character got into the combat rack. Opposite him was a student. They prepared to fight. The main character sharply swung his hand and began the return countdown. The student with excitement became in a combat pose. At this time, the score reached 2. The main character, along with the girl, showed the same gestures with his hands. There was a draw in the competition. Gao looked at the girl with displeasure and thought that in the first round was a draw. Sin, with excitement and impatience, suggested that the teacher try again. The teacher looked at the girl and noticed that she was nervous. He tried to predict what she would use in the next round. The protagonist showed the scissors with his fingers. His rival showed a stone. Gao shouted displeasedly that he had lost. He thought that he needed to lose in the next round. Sin squeezed a fist with great excitement. She looked at the teacher displeasedly. The girl shouted angrily that if she wins in the next party, then the teacher will lose. Gao, with excitement, told the girl that he would have to wake his fighting spirit. The guy focusedly raised his hand and shouted to the girl to prepare. The protagonist stood a fighting rack and began to count for the girl. The student very scaredly closed her eyes and immediately shouted about the paper. With her eyes closed, Sin showed her hand to the side. This one symbolized the paper in the game. Sin scaredly opened one eye. She thought that she unconsciously put her hand. The girl realized that she had won. Gao thoughtfully thought that his plan had worked. Gao explained to the girl in a calm voice that he had already won 2 rounds of the 3. Sin was very amazed. She asked the guy, did she really win? Gao, with a smile, told the student that she had won. He will no longer have to force her to study. The guy cunningly spread his hands to the side. He thought that if the girl will study herself, he could not blame him. The student was silent. She looked softly in front of her and said nothing. Gao asked the schoolgirl, is she always upset after the victory? Sin was very angry. She asked the guy strictly, how is this possible? The student very excitingly invited her teacher to play again. Gao looked at the girl with interest and asked what she wants to play in. Sin looked at the guy displeasedly and asked him to close his eyes first. Gao closed his eyes. He could not understand what the girl wanted to do. The student continued to repeat to herself that she could not bear it anymore. The schoolgirl came up and kissed the teacher. He was very surprised. The main character stood in the room. Together with the girl, they were covered by a curtain. Gao silently shoved the student from him and carefully studied her gaze. Sin turned around and went aside. Gao felt a strange feeling in his body. The girl stood with her back to the guy and said that she needed to end the lesson. Gao was surprised to answer the student that all this is so. He wanted to say something else. Sin pushed the surprised teacher from the room and shouted that the lesson was over. Gao began to knock on the door with all her might. He viciously asked the girl, why did she drive him out? The student through the door said goodbye to the teacher. She smiled herself. Gao thought displeased to himself that the boss said him again. He could not understand anything. The main character saw a red racing car in front of him. He thought that his face was a soft touch. The guy went to the car and looked with great attention at the reflection of his face in the mirror. Gao was surprised to notice very bright signs of lipstick on his face. The guy realized that Bai had just driven up in his car. The protagonist began to quickly wipe his hands on his face. He looked in his reflection in the lateral mirror. At this time, a lateral mirror opened in the car. The driver looked at the frightened protagonist displeasedly. Bai angrily demanded that the guy not rub lipstick on her car. Gao scaredly pointed a finger at the girl and asked what she was doing here. The driver shouted displeasedly to the guy that he could not even stop the car. She said goodbye. The car broke up sharply. The main character shouted after the girl that he was returning to the city. A few minutes later, Gao sat inside the car on the passenger chair. The driver could not understand what the guy was thinking about her. The protagonist told the girl displeased that she would look at the road. Bai slyly pointed a finger at her face. She asked the main character to enlighten her. Gao, with a smile, answered the girl that he would not give any comments. He understood that Bai should not find out that he was kissed by Sin. Suddenly, the main character saw something interesting on the street. He demanded that the driver slow down. Bai asked the passenger with excitement, "What happened?" The car stood near the park. A guy with a girlfriend was sitting near the bench. Lula sat on a bench with her acquaintance. They had fun together. The main character, in a dissatisfied voice, ordered the driver that they needed to go. Bai looked at her passenger and asked if he was in order. The main character looked out the window and replied that he was in order. Only something was a little wrong. The main character, in a cunning voice, answered the girl that he said that he would let go. Gao, with a smile, told the girl that now there is nothing to hold for. He invited her to go. The main character raced in a car with a girl. He scaredly shouted that she was going in the wrong direction. The school is located elsewhere. Bai answered the guy that no one was lucky to go back to school. Gao was very surprised. He scaredly asked the girl, where did they go? The driver replied that they were going to her home. The main character answered the driver displeased that he had just lost love, but he is not such a person. The girl knocked the guy on the head with a fist. She explained that her father wants to see him. Gao was surprised to tell the driver that he would go to the supermarket to buy a gift to Mr. Bei. The guy ran to the entrance to the store. The girl shouted after him that her father does not like gifts from other people. The car drove up to the luxurious estate of the Bai family. The girl told the guy to go out. Gao looked around with great surprise. He said with admiration that the house of a rich man looks elegant. A guy with a servant appeared near the entrance. They greeted Gao and his companion. Gao was very surprised due to the fact that the servants called the girl an older sister. Bai knocked him in displeasure on her face. The servant with glasses looked at the girl and said that she did not look like her ordinary sister. Bai reminded Christian so that he would not make an elephant from a fly. The servant asked her forgiveness. Bai told the servant to go forward with her. The maid told the main character that they would take care of her things. Gao replied that he should not worry. The girl went into the house and greeted her father. Gao stood behind. The man turned around and looked at his daughter. Bai informed him that she had returned and brought Gao with her. The owner held the newspaper in his hands. He said with a smile to the guy that the girl brought him, but did not say about it in advance. The guy with a smile informed the owner that it was a great honor for him to meet him. The protagonist brought the man a bag of souvenir. He asked the owner to take him. Father reminded her daughter that she had to warn the guy that he was not accepting gifts. Bai answered her father that the main character did not listen to her. Gao folded his hands in dismay and asked him to be spared. Bai looked strictly at the guy and said that he did it intentionally. The main character slyly asked the owner to first look at the gift. The man carefully looked into the bag. He was curious what was there. The owner turned cheerfully and told the main character that he would take his gift. The man told the surprised guy to be not polite and sits inside. Bai was very surprised when she heard such words from her father. Bai grabbed the protagonist by the tie. She strictly asked what he bought for her father. Gao whispered quietly to the girl what he gave for the owner of a film called Love Island. A girlfriend hit the guy with her hand in displeasure and said angrily that they had talked well. Sue menacingly urged the protagonist to answer what it was. Fu said it was an alcoholic peanut. However, the angry Bai doubted his words and demanded to tell her the truth. Gao smiled and said that he had only 20 yuan, so he could only buy it. Jen, in turn, unexpectedly interrupted their debate and asked how his working days pass. As soon as Shui tried to answer him, Xiao decided to help the guy with this. As a result, the girl stepped on his foot so that Fu did not say anything superfluous. The teenager naturally understood her hint and said that he liked the work and everything is fine. At this moment, the servant Christian brought Mr. Zhou a cup of tea. Suddenly, Bai noticed that recently he had not seen the young man at work, reminding of a recent conflict with Li manager. Gao, in turn, asked for forgiveness from him and stated that he would take an example with Shuyo. Jen also asked Xiao what kind of work she picked up for young talent. The girl was at a loss and did not know how to answer, subsequently which began to mumble something indistinctly. Then Shui said that he was extremely grateful to his daughter for help, because she appointed him a cleaner. Of course, Shui understood that Fu deliberately substituted her, knowing what the reaction of the head of the company would be. Zhu immediately asked his daughter if she really hired him as a cleaner. Bai lowered her head and quietly said that it was true. Jen was clearly unhappy. Surprisingly, Gao decided to help Xiao get out of this situation and began to defend her. In addition, he perfectly understood that Zhou would not leave this without attention. Then Shui said that he was really grateful to her, and she acted correctly. Su, like her father, simply froze in place, being in a light perplexity. The guy, in turn, said that he seriously thinks so and asked to listen to him. Then he began his monologue, because if he came to the company for a good position, employees would have understood everything. And in order to avoid such a situation, the manager of Xiao appointed him a cleaner, which was quite logical. Surprised, Zhou asked his daughter, did she really think everything brilliantly? Bai answered positively and invited everyone together. Naturally, everyone agreed. Suddenly, the head of the family said that Zhui should have learned. But Fu helped her avoid punishment, adding that in fact she is a good person. But she has an extremely quick, tempered character. Therefore, Gao will have to come to terms with this. The teenager replied that he would try to do this. At the same time, Zhen said that he initially specially scared the young man as soon as he crossed the threshold of his house, and he would have returned the gift back if he had been from someone else. But the words of Shuai forced him to think. The guy asked if this could be somehow connected with the manager of Li. Zhou smiled and noticed that the little one was pretty smart. But the main problem lies in the father of Shui. Then Fu suggested that in fact they could think something bad against the Bai family. At that moment, Xiao entered the room and urged everyone to go to the table, as the dinner was already ready. Suddenly, Bai asked the young man to make friends with his daughter, which was rather unexpected. Su, in her arrogant manner, demanded Yi Yo to join the table also. The guy understood that he would make friends with her would not be easy, given her complex character. After some time, the girl volunteered to take the young man home, but the result, as always, was disappointing. Because Xiao still did not restrain her emotions and urged Shui not to sleep when she was driving. Finally, the main character got out of the car and headed for his hostel, where he met neither along the way. The young lady, in turn, stated that she has an extremely important conversation for him. However, the teenager was not in the spirit, and ignoring her, she passed by. The girl was surprised. In this connection, Van immediately turned around and followed him, urging her to devote a couple of minutes to her. Fu still did not pay attention to her and slowly headed towards the hostel. And even when she informed him that she wanted to talk to him about Lulu, Gao sharply replied that only her boyfriend should deal with the problems of Lin. Stunned by such a sudden statement, Van once again asked to listen to her. Having said that only he could help her and the very serious matter, finally, Shuai agreed to talk to her. After a couple of minutes, they went into the cafe and Fu asked what the problem was. I did not answer that. Since Lin contacted the pull, it has become strange and constantly ignores it. Gao decided to reassure her and stated that this was the normal behavior of a lover. However, Van shouted fiercely that Lulu was returning alone to home all the time. But Shui still did not see any problem in this and hurried to leave. The girl continued to say that the girlfriend constantly looks tired, but refuses to call the reason for this condition, so it is necessary to ask her boyfriend about it. But Lin does not give her a phone number. Why? Fu drank his drink carelessly and noticed that she could inform the police about it, but they are unlikely to react. Then she shouted in an angry that Gao was obliged to return the former Lula. The dumbfounded young man did not expect this from Van and literally froze in place, realizing that she went too far. The girl apologized to Fu but continued to stand on her own. After all, when Lin was friends with Shui, she looked happy and was always fun. The guy listened to neither and offered to lead her to the hostel, saying that she would better not think about it and calm down, after which he went to his core. Along the way, he decided to delete the contact of Lulu, since he believed that sometimes in life it was just necessary to let everything on his own. After a couple of minutes, Lin stood in the path of the protagonist. The girl was in an incomprehensible state. Gao, in turn, suggested that it was sleepy, as it was driven around. However, when Lula came closer, the teenager smelled a distinct smell of alcohol, realizing that something inexplicable was happening to her, in connection with which he asked why she was drunk. At first, the girl, as if she did not understand who was standing in front of her, and slowly raised her eyes to the young man. As soon as Lin realized that it was Shuai, she blushed sharply with shame and tried to hide her gaze. At the same time, Lulu unexpectedly burst into tears and began to ask for forgiveness from Fu. The shocked Gao did not know what to do, but he understood that the girl definitely needed help. Suddenly, he remembered how a couple of minutes ago he deleted her number and promised himself that he would forget her. But he could do nothing with himself and hugged the unfortunate girl, trying to reassure her in every possible way, peculiating that he was the wrong place in the wrong place and not in a timely manner. At the same time, the teenager was asked just one question: why she was crying. A moment later, Fu found that Lin simply fell asleep in his arms. A conscience fought in it with the decision to reject Lulu, but the good and empathic side won. Suddenly, he caught himself thinking that it was already too late and you can't go to the female dormitory, since in the morning there will be bad rumors that he brought a drunken girl. Then the teenager picked up an unconscious girl in his arms and began to think what to do next. The only way out was to go to the hotel, where he came with sleeping Lin. The old man smiled and said that he would rent a good room for them, but Shui hastened to report that she was his sister and just went through a little alcohol. Naturally, the employee of the institution misunderstood everything and continued to accompany them to the room with his statements. Finally, Gao put her into the room and put her on the bed, but at that moment the phone rang. Fu suggested that it was her boyfriend who decided to find out how she got to the hostel. However, in fact, it was neither. The young man decided to ask her to call back tomorrow. As soon as he picked up the phone, the worried Van began to ask her friend about why she had not returned. The teenager instantly interrupted her hysteria and said that they are now with her at the hotel. The dumbfounded neither asked. Shuai asked, did he really take her to the hotel? The girl began to shout that Gao was in a hurry to do events and has no right to do this with Lin, even if Lula herself does not mind, because it is extremely low and vile on his part. Then the protagonist objected that it was actually late to return to the hostel, and he did not want anything bad, adding that in the morning she herself will make sure of this when she talked to her, after which she hung up. Suddenly, the teenager looked at the cute Lin, catching himself thinking that she was very beautiful. Fu tried in every possible way to calm down and pull himself together, but he did not succeed. As a result, he reached for her to touch her for a moment, but at that moment it seemed to him that Lula would wake up now as she stirred. Then Lin even uttered the name of her boyfriend, which instantly pushed Gao. The guy literally boiled with anger and immediately jumped out of bed. Emotions prevailed. After all, he realized that all his hopes are in vain and in her heart there is no place for him. Subsequently, Shuai covered her with a blanket and, in upset feelings, headed for the exit. With anger, the young man slapped the door and forced himself to quickly leave the hotel. Thus, a sharp knock woke the girl, and she opened her eyes, finding herself in an unknown place. The next day, Fu went to work, where Shui appointed him an assistant manager. However, the guy was still with Lula with his thoughts and did not hear the words of Xiao. He was curious if Lin remembered what had happened yesterday. Bai, in turn, turned to the young man, but he did not answer her. Then the girl slammed the table. Finally, Gao came to his senses. Shui called him to speak with a couple of words at the conference, in connection with a new position. The perplexing teenager instantly stood behind the cabinet and hastened to get together with his thoughts. Then he named his name and began a fairly long monologue, speaking that his parents named him with such a name because they wanted to grow a successful person, but he is not rich and not beautiful. In the conference hall, there was a grave silence. Everyone was at a loss from a strange speech Fu. Friends decided to support him and began to shout that the monologue was chic. The Xiao was of a different opinion. Shui really began to think that he had performed perfectly and thereby cheer up his mood. But Bai suddenly pushed him out of the cabinet and announced the closure of the meeting. However, Gao said that he had not yet completed the speech. The furious Sui, in turn, ordered him to go to her office, where she began to scream furiously at the subordinate, saying that he was supposed to prepare his speech and not carry nonsense. Then she provided him with records of large companies and demanded that in the future he explained more understandable. Surprised Fu looked at the documents and was amazed that the meeting was just over, and the records were already ready. Xiao, in turn, began to gloat too much because this copy would be sent to all directors. At the same time, in addition to the text, they will also be sent an audio recording from the past meeting. The main character was shocked by such a turn of events and understood that the head of Zhou would clearly not like it. Suddenly, Shui gave him a voice recorder and said that he was better to quickly rewrite the audio recording so as not to screw up. Shui was extremely grateful to her for help and said that he would continue to make such mistakes. Gao also asked her where his new workplace, because now he is an assistant manager. Bai pointed to a ragged table with a broken lamp and said that from now on, he will work there, which fundamentally changed with the workplace of the Xiao itself, which had an ergonomic chair and a beautiful table with accessories. But this was not the biggest problem, since his workplace was in the Bai office. In this connection, Fu asked if he would really be forced to work with her in the same room. The girl grinned maliciously and said that this is a really good question, adding that he is her personal assistant and therefore it is quite logical to equip his place in her office. Then the teenager hinted to her that they would constantly be in the same room, and this is already too much. But Bai did not want to hear anything, and once again rushed him to redo not the notes with audio recording. Su herself sat down in her comfortable chair because she was too tired for the whole day. Gao, meanwhile, worked in the sweat of his face to finally put the notes in order, constantly flickering in front of the eyes of the girl, who was clearly to my liking. The young lady caught herself thinking that when the guy is serious, he is pretty. After a certain time, the responsible Shui brought the matter to the end and was insanely tired. But he had the imprudence with Xiao to mention that he was going to go to Yu. The reaction of the girl followed instantly, and when the young man stated that everything was ready and he was leaving, the angry Bai ordered him to work a little more, adding that if he really needs to be freed as soon as possible, then you need to quickly deal with the papers, after which she slammed the door angrily. Fu, in turn, could not understand what happened to her. Finally freed himself, the young man hurried to Sin and met at the butler's house. Noticing an unknown car, Gao asked Liu. The guests really came to them, because if so, then he could come tomorrow. The old man said that this was not necessary, but asked for some time not to enter Yu. The perplexed Shui did not understand what was happening, and went to the house. After a certain time, the butler kindly asked the young teacher to go to Sinny. What he hastened to inform the young lady, who urged her teacher to enter. Joyful Fu ran into the room with a gift and said that he had a little surprise. However, he found that she had a larger gift for him, in the form of an unknown guy. They met with glances, and Gao could not understand what happened. Yu looked frustrated. The stranger smiled and asked Shui, was he really her teacher? The dumbfounded Fu answered positively, wondering who he was. The main character suggested that they are in a rather close relationship. The sad Sin, in turn, in a sad voice invited the teacher to sit down. Gao immediately asked when they could start the lesson and whether it is convenient for her to work today. Then Yu, all the same dying voice, reminded him of how the guy lost her bet. An unknown Malay ironically noted that he was a really good teacher who lost to his student. Shui instantly replied that in fact the final result is no different from the winnings, after which there was an extremely awkward silence. The teenager did not know how to behave and what to say. Suddenly, a stranger said that in this case he would go down while she solved the issue with her teacher. However, Sin suddenly grabbed his hand and asked not to leave, which naturally did not like Fu. The girl also invited everyone together to dine, but the unknown Malay was not enthusiastic about this venture. Gao could not understand what happened to her and why she began to behave like that. At that moment, he suddenly called him. Hearing the strange ringtone, the stranger again began to pursue the teacher. Meanwhile, she did not tell Shui that the irreparable happened and he should come. The guy turned to Yu, but for an unknown reason, the girl turned away from him. Then the teenager answered Van that he needed an address, and he will soon come. Then he hastened to say goodbye to Sin and said that he needed to leave. and their classes need to be postponed the next day. The young student was dumbfounded by such an act of the teacher. She hurried after him, but Fu slammed the door behind him and went to the exit. An unknown guy began to say that for such an attitude to work, he should be dismissed, after which he suggested Sinyui to go to his house to make lessons together. The girl, in turn, was upset by the behavior of Gao, which at that time rushed to the rescue of neither in order to finally understand what happened. Seeing Shui, Van immediately called him out. She had an extremely worried look. The teenager asked what happened and why had to go through the whole city. The girl said that she actually followed Lula and found out terrible details. Then, she turned it towards the nightclub and said that Lin went there. The shocked Fu could not understand why a little girl to visit such dubious establishments. Neither noted that she did not dare to go to this place alone and therefore called him. The brave young man said that she did everything right, urging her to remain outside. Gao himself headed towards the club and said that most of all there would be problems. Therefore, if necessary, she will need to immediately call the police. The girl was very scared and asked the guy only about one thing, to pull out her friend. Shui, in turn, was decisively configured and went inside the night institution. He no less Van wanted to help Lulu put his life in order and understand everything. Going inside, the protagonist realized that he needed to ask someone about Lin, since in such a crowd people cannot be found. In connection with which, the guy went to the bartender and said that he was doing to him. The club employee immediately stated that over 50 yuan would tell everything that interests the teenager. The dumbfounded Gao began to delve into his wallet, but found only one coin. Relying on good luck, the young man handed him a coin and said that he had a second time he forgot to take money with him. The bartender threw a coin into him and said that in this case he could not help. However, Shui nevertheless found an approach to an employee of the nightclub and talked to him. In the end result, the guy agreed to share such a necessary information. Fu instantly asked if a very sweet girl came here. The bartender replied that there were a lot of such ones. Gao paraphrased and called her an exquisite lady. The employee immediately lit up and he stated that Lula was quite famous here, adding that she came to them one night, and he was surprised by the appearance of the princess in such a place. Then Shui asked him to organize him with her, but the bartender said that even Gunzi could not achieve her. Fu did not expect that it would really be with her. It would be so difficult to see. In this connection, he began to find out how much it would cost to make it a company. The guy replied that she was just distributing drinks to visitors and does not deal with anything bad. Gao sighed with angst and asked why she got a job as a waitress here. At that moment, the bartender saw Lin and pointed out to her, saying that Maltz was really lucky because today she works in this hall. The girl, meanwhile, carried various alcoholic beverages to visitors. An employee of the institution noticed that she was an incredibly beautiful girl and asked if he was her young man. Shui ignored his question and immediately rushed to her, asking him to give him a couple of minutes. However, Lin was not enthusiastic about his presence and said that she needed to work, but the teenager insisted on his own. Assuring that their conversation would not take much time, she finally agreed. Some of the visitors did not like that the stranger was pestering her and wanted to inform Gunzi about this. Meanwhile, the perplexed Fu asked Lulu why she got a job here and why she needed money. After all, most likely even her boyfriend did not know about it. The girl sharply lowered her gaze. Lin began to get nervous and continued to look at the floor silently. Gao decided to console her, speaking about how important it is for him, even though there is no place for him in her life. But when she is in trouble, he cannot find a place for himself. At that moment, Shui took her hand. Fu said that, despite this, he would always support her in everything. The young lady was touched by his piercing speech and her tears began to be stolen. Suddenly, she began to ask for forgiveness from him, while the teenager urged her to return to ordinary life. After a while, Lin finally calmed down and the main character said that it was better not to linger here. But it was at that moment that the unknown called the girl. Of course she recognized this voice. As soon as Lula turned around, Gunzi doused her with water. The girl did not expect such a development of events. The dumbfounded Gao asked her whether she was, and who was it. Lin tried to get up and replied that everything was fine with her. Fu immediately rushed to her. The guy threw his jacket on her so that the young lady would never catch a cold. Li, in turn, apologized to her, saying that his glass slipped out of his hands. Then he went to Lulu and said that he was able to personally take care of her. At the same time, he held out a hand to her, which Shui instantly removed from her shoulder. The extremely indignant Gunzi began to be interested in who he was and what he allows himself. Cao understood that at the moment it is better to avoid brawls because Lin's security is first of all, Lee menacingly asked the girl, "Is she really going to leave now? After all, her change has not yet ended, and in the middle of the working day it is forbidden to do this. Otherwise, this threatens with a fine or even dismissal without any payment." But Lula insisted that she needed to change clothes so as not to catch a cold. Gunzi smiled and stated that this was not a problem at all, and he will be happy to help her, since in his room there are outfits suitable for her, and she can choose any of them. The girl refused in every possible way and asked him to stop this performance. Fu, in turn, could not stand it and began to scream so that the insolent did not cross the line of permitted. Then he inflicted a crushing blow to him. Lee did not expect such a turn. As a result, the guy collapsed extremely painfully on the floor. Everyone was in shock. His minions immediately rushed to him to help to get up, asking if everything was in order with him. The shocked Gunzi grabbed his cheek. At the same time, he did not restrain himself in statements. Shui once again ordered him not to touch Lin and threatened him with reprisal. Lee instantly jumped up and said that since the boy decided to play the hero, he would satisfy his desire. Then he grabbed the bottle and added that he was the first to start, so he would have to answer for it. The Gunzi suddenly broke the bottle on the table and rushed towards the teenager. Having ordered their accomplices to free this zone from the guests in order to deal with the upstart, the worried Lulu called on Shuai to immediately leave because the consequences could be deplorable. Thus, armed bandits untied their hands and continued to provoke Fu. One of them unexpectedly turned out to be behind the protagonist, but the guy panicked. Realizing that he needs to run away from Lin as soon as possible to protect her, the girl meanwhile called the police, saying that they would come soon, after which she again called on her savior to run away, because she should not apologize to them. However, Gao could not allow them to mock the poor girl, and of course stayed with her to the end. One of Lee's gang noted that he could not stand against Gunzi, and it would be better if he listened to Lin. Then he hurried to attack the young man, but he did not know what outcome awaits him. Shuai immediately grabbed his hand, making it clear that he was not some kind of profane in martial arts. The thug was shocked by such an incredible reaction of the guy and could not believe what was happening. Then Gao began to extremely painfully twist his hand to the naive servant Li. In the final result, Fu knocked over the bandit, showing his skills to the fullest. Thus, he was on the floor. But at that moment, he was bypassed from the other side. But Shui did not have time to react in a timely manner, only hearing the steps behind him. Subsequently, what Verzila struck him with a stool on the back, and the guy fell to the ground. The other instantly grabbed the girl, preventing her from helping his savior. Gao drew attention to the fact that he had previously received injuries, began to hurt even more. The Gunzi, in turn, received true pleasure from what was happening, speaking that the Malay was not worn about and he will not be able to confront him. After all, now he was in a position where his life was in danger. Li again took a broken bottle in his hands and rushed to the defeated Gao. Suddenly, Lula shouted loudly so that he would immediately let Shuai let go. Whether the indignant noticed that he was the first to rush at them, so he must answer for his actions. Then Lin proposed an alternative option so as not to harm her friend. The girl burst into tears, realizing that she had no other choice and will have to obey him. Fu, in turn, thought that he had ruined everything again because he just wanted to support Lula. The Gunzi continued to persuade the girl to compromise to save the guy, having offered her at first to drink well in order to defuse the situation. However, even in this position, Gao did not give up and grabbed a broken bottle from his hands. Gun did not have time to react in a timely manner, as well as his minions, who did not keep track of Fu. The teenager put a bottle to Li's neck and stated that he began to rejoice early. Then he ordered all his accomplices to stand still, otherwise their boss farewell to life. The Gunzi at the moment turned into a coward who tried to calm the protagonist, but the young man did not bother his tricks and ordered to immediately release Lula, which they did. Gao asked the girl whether everything was fine with her. Lin answered positively. Then, Shui demanded that his people no longer interfered with them, gave the opportunity to leave the club. Li immediately commanded his thugs to part and let them go to the exit. Fu understood that the police could come at any time. It was also a video surveillance on the outside. Soon, the guy urged the girl to go out on the first where a van was and catch a taxi. However, Lula began to argue with him, but the teenager quickly formed her and ordered him to do as he said. Lin instantly rushed to the exit, as was promised whether no one blocked her the path. The Gunzi, in turn, tried to outwit the young man, asking him to let him go, because they fulfilled the main requirement. Supposing that in fact they just wanted to play a little and overdo it, naturally, the servants of Li began to play along with him, and say that this is really true. Zai himself noticed that the guy was quite brave and they should make friends. Gao was not so stupid and ignored his tricks, then suddenly pushed the gun forward. Thus, he collapsed to the floor. Shui himself rushed to leave the nightclub. Whether the embittered immediately ordered his minions to catch up and beat the malts, the armed thugs immediately began to fulfill the boss's order. But the teenager by that time managed to run out into the street, where he suddenly discovered Zhui. Bai tried in every possible way to calm the tearful Lula. And at that moment she saw Fu. The dumbfounded Gao asked what she was doing here and where with the police. Xiao did not answer anything and rushed him to get into the car as the bandits were chasing him. Lin also hastened to climb into the car in order to be in time before the arrival of the thugs, which, in turn, almost overtook them, in connection with which Shui called on Sui will rush forward. The girl smiled absolutely calmly and said that she had nothing to worry about. Then she sharply turned the car and went away from the minions of the Gunzi. Finally, Fu sighed with relief and noticed that it was all over and they were safe. Lin thanked him for his help and suddenly noticed that the young man had a pale face. She asked if he was in order, but Gao fell silent abruptly. The girl repeated the question again. Shui replied that he just needed to relax a bit. Then he lost consciousness and fell directly onto Lula that he naturally did not like Bai, who began to demand that he immediately get up from the poor girl. But Fu had already slept. After a certain time, the protagonist woke up in the hospital's ward and saw Lin in front of him. Extremely worried, Lula asked his health and ran to him. Gao handed out a tired voice that at the sight of her, he became much better. The girl immediately covered herself with her hands and backed away. The guy said that he did not mean it. Then he jumped up from the hospital bed and said that he was really full of strength. However, after a moment, his back cracked and incredible pain pierced his body. Shui again laid down in the bed. Lula noted that the doctor strongly recommended him bed rest. Fu did not argue and said that he was very afraid for her, because she had no place in that ill-fated club. As soon as the girl wanted to tell him something, the teenager urged her to go home, relax, adding that if she has the next problems, then they will definitely discuss them tomorrow. But Lula said that he was wounded because of her and she was obliged to help him. At that moment, the phone suddenly rang. Gao was alerted, suggesting that it was her boyfriend or Gunzi. Lin sharply turned his sad look at the guy. The young man immediately realized everything. In this connection, he once again said that everything is fine with him and she can go. The young lady looked compassionately at the teenager and said that she urgently needed to leave. Then she asked him for forgiveness. Shui only smiled back at her. Lula noted that she would visit him tomorrow, and he should sleep well. Suddenly, Fu said that in fact she is not obliged to take care of him and come here. Lin jumped out of the ward and Gao seized horror, because the guy understood that she could no longer come to him so that he would not be nervous. Meanwhile, Sin raced along the corridors of the hospital, which was looking for a Shui ward. Finally finding her, the girl opened the door and asked her teacher if he was in order. However, she did not like the picture scene where the nurse made him a dressing. Surprised, Gao asked the girl what she was doing here and why she came. Yu, in turn, looked at the naked torso of the teacher and immediately turned away, having stated that the teacher should dress, while her voice sharply began to tremble. Sin added that since she saw him in this form, she should take care of him. Fu replied that she was drawing rather strange conclusions. The nurse instantly hurried to the exit. Then, the young lady turned around and began to mumble something slurred under her breath. Then she finally asked for forgiveness from the teenager, which even more surprised him. Shui threw over a hospital shirt and asked what happened again. Yu replied that because of her, he went to the bar to get drunk from grief, because that day she rejected him. Gao did not expect to hear this, and in bewilderment froze in place, not knowing what to tell her. Suddenly, Xin Yui burst into tears and stated that Uncle Liu told her about this. Fu urged her not to cry and suddenly remembered. Before leaving, he really told the butler that he was going to the bar. In the meantime, Yu did not stop sobbing. The teenager did not know how to get out of this situation. For some time, the girl could not calm down. The main character was confused. Then he stated that in fact his wounds were in no way connected with her and what happened that day. However, Sin did not believe him and urged him to stop deceiving her, because in her opinion it was logical. Shui still stood on his own and said that everything was completely different from how she came up with herself. Suddenly, the girl calmed down and asked if the teacher was no longer angry with her. Then the young man asked her a counter question, because he was interested in the personality of that stranger. In connection with which Gao was curious who was this unknown Malay, who was in her room. Yu replied that this was the son of her father's friend and his name is Lun Tao. but they are just friends, adding that at the same time she knows about his feelings for her. Besides, they are from one school. But Sin claimed that she was absolutely indifferent to him, and they had nothing serious. The young man again called her to calm down and noticed that he realized that little one was just her friend, although it looked strange, as if she wanted to hide their relationship. Suddenly, the girl blushed and mysteriously looked at her teacher. Then she asked the teacher to close her eyes for a conciliatory gift. Naturally, Shui refused a surprise, perfectly understanding what she wants to do. Yu asked if he was still angry with her, and therefore he is not interested in her gift. Cao said nothing, which made Sin think, and she repeated the question again. Finally, Fu replied that he was not angry with her, and she did not understand everything correctly. Then he agreed to accept a surprise from her, only asked not to leave lipsticks on his face, by adding that it should act within the framework of the permitted and go beyond the line. The girl, in turn, promised that everything would be fine, and the teenager closed his eyes. Then she reached for him to kiss and closed her eyes. Shui was in shock. He instantly backed back and called her to calm down, but the young lady was extremely persistent. Meanwhile, Van and Zhui wandered along the corridor of the hospital towards the Hao chamber. A moment later, Bai went into the ward and saw an unimaginable picture. It was also shocked by what was happening. The guy immediately said that they understood everything incorrectly. Imbalued girls silently watched this scene and literally boiled with anger. At that moment, Sinyui nevertheless achieved her and kissed Fu on the cheek. The young man did not know how to react. Xiao became furious and did not hesitate in expressions. Shuai again fell into trouble. The only one who was pleased with himself is Yu, who blurred in a smile. Van closed her eyes completely, not understanding how Gao could fall so low and allow such a thing. On his cheek was the lipstick Sin. The dumbfounded guy immediately began to wash her, not understanding how he constantly manages to get into such ridiculous situations. At this time, the nurse approached the ward of the protagonist and did not even have time to open the door. As she ran out of her in tears, she was most likely to be ashamed of her act. The perplexing employee of the hospital only looked at her, not understanding what had happened. In this regard, she decided to go to Fu later when everything would be settled. Thus, Gao was left alone with two extremely dissatisfied girls. The frightened teenager climbed onto the bed and asked what they were going to do. The indignant Van menacingly said that he was a terrible person because last night Shui was with Lulu, and today with Yu. The guy in turn said that in fact, nothing bad happened and the nurse could confirm this. The furious Bai naturally did not believe him and called on to bypass him from the other side. In order to prevent this lousy to escape, Sue was literally not in herself from anger. But suddenly Van rushed to the exit and said that she personally recognized everything from the nurse. Fu followed her, but the embittered Xiao sharply grabbed him and dragged him back. Then she began to interrogate him what he did with Lin last night. Cao understood that he would not be able to explain to her, since she simply would not believe him. Therefore, he decided to distract her and asked why she was near the club yesterday and why the police did not come. Bai replied that yesterday, she received a message from him with a request to call law enforcement officials. Shui was surprised and said that he remembered exactly how Van sent him, and not her. Then he saw a missed call from Shu and asked if she called him yesterday. Bai answered positively, saying that she wanted to discuss the working moments, but Fu could not understand how she ran into Lula. She said that at that moment she was nearby and met neither, who told about everything. This coincidence seemed extremely suspicious to the teenager, as if someone intentionally tuned everything. As soon as Gao began to rejoice that everything worked out, he stumbled upon the next claim of the girl. She, in every possible way, called him not to fall into trouble and at least a little cares about herself. Meanwhile, Van returned to the ward and reported that the doctor allowed him to get out of the hospital. At the same time, the hospital took all expenses, which the young man was extremely surprised. Sud explained that in fact her company paid all the services. Fu was prematurely delighted, because Bai said that all expenses for hospitalization and further treatment will be deducted from his salary. Suddenly, Van began to thank Xiao on behalf of Lin and the rest, because they gave Shua the possibility of career growth. The dumbfounded Zhue called for silence immediately, but it was already too late. Since Gao began to guess what was actually happening and demanded an explanation, Xiao noticed that now it is not so important, because he was also injured because of Lulu, adding that in reality, Lin did not just get a job at a nightclub. The young man was shocked by such information and urged her to tell the whole truth. Then Bai said that the main reason for this action to Lulu was her boyfriend. The indignant protagonist asked why she did it. Yi said that Tianya set up a business partner, and therefore Lin signed an agreement with the club to loosen the pressure on Yu. For Shuai, this was another blow, because he realized that she was really ready for everything for him. Neither, in turn, noted that Mr. Bai has already found out that this agreement has no legal force. Xiao realized that in fact this contract only frightened the youth, and it is necessary to conduct a certain course of training for them, Van agreed. Suddenly, Zhui threw her displeased look towards the teenager. Then I asked what he was constantly thinking about. The sad Gao went to the window. Then he stated that in a sense he envies the guy Lula, for which she made such victims, adding that, apparently in a past life, Tian saved humanity, since they are trying so hard for him. The girls at the time felt sorry for Fu, because he tried in vain to achieve Lin's location. Suddenly, Bai headed for the exit and called on Van to proceed after her. The girl instantly ran out after the teacher, completely forgetting about Shui. A few days later, the teenager finally recovered, which naturally is the merit of Su. After that, Gao jokingly called Xinyu and said that without her lipstick he was much better. Since then, the young man has not seen with Lulu that he had only good for him. As soon as Fu returned to work, he was met by Aunt Van, who called out the guy. The woman greeted Shui and asked why he was absent for a long time. Gao replied that he took a vacation for several days, as he was unhealthy, but now he was in order. Van noticed that he came to the office quite early, because usually young people are less punctual. Suddenly, a woman was curious about whether he had a girlfriend or wife. Fu did not expect such a sharp question and answered negatively, asking in response why she was interested in this. Aunt said that in this case he must be introduced to her granddaughter. Of course, Shui refused this meeting and noticed that he had too much business. However, Van insisted on her and began to write out compliments of Gao, saying what a good person he is. By that time, the elevator had already descended to the first floor, and the teenager hastened to go into it, realizing that he is better off now to avoid such conversations and especially meetings. Then the woman said that he would certainly introduce him. But another day, Fu only smiled sweetly in response. He himself sighed with relief, catching himself thinking that the old people always want to reduce their granddaughters with someone. At that moment, Shui heard a malicious laugh away and turned around. Stu stood in front of him. At a certain moment, she could not restrain her laughter, then Gao only scared. An extremely displeased young man asked that she was so amused and why she was pursuing him. Bai, through laughter, said that his name was already called blindly. The angry guy, in turn, noticed that this should not worry. Xiao stated that he was too preoccupied with this issue because it was just a date. The protagonist was furious and asked if she really wants to raise a feeling of guilt in him. Then he moved to the counterattack and said that she was coming to work early because she had no relationship for a long time. What was only angry with an already quick-tempered girl who immediately made him understand who the boss is here. Then she ordered him to bring her a cup of coffee as her personal assistant. The angry Shuai replied that he was her assistant and not a servant and would not prepare her coffee. Then Bai showed him a check for hospitalization and treatment, making it clear that he owes her. Naturally, he had nothing to cover this fact, and he dutifully went to the buffet, where he continued to express his discontent but already with the coffee machine. Suddenly, Gao found a plus in this situation, because when he pays her debt, he would free himself from slavery. The question was only when exactly this would happen. Soon Shui brought her coffee in the office. The teenager drew attention to the fact that the girl was trying to reach the upper shelf, but she did not manage to do this. Whereas a real assistant, he decided to help her get the necessary folder with documents, which was done a moment later, while the young man smiled at her, which could surprise Yue. The young lady thanked him and noticed that he really went in time. Fu caught himself thinking that in fact they could get along. Even a couple of minutes ago he was furious. In this connection, the teenager made an offended look and turned away from the boss. But at that moment he noticed that a stand of several books under the feet of Xiao began to take a break. After a few seconds, a couple of books flew out from under the feet of Bai, and she could not resist. Shui called on her to be careful, but it was already too late, and the girl flew down. At the same time, she did not have something to seize, and the fall was inevitable. Gao came to the rescue. Confused, she closed her eyes, but a moment later she felt a soft landing. Fu said that everything was in order, and then Sui opened her eyes, finding herself on a young man. She immediately became ashamed and she hurried to get up, realizing that he specially bed under her so that she would not suffer. Then, with a calm look, she said that everything was fine with her and he should not worry like that. However, Bai got to her feet too abruptly and crashed into the closet, thereby shaking it. As a result, the sideboard began to collapse on it, and the books to fall from the shelves. Thus, she was crushed by the weight of the cabinet, and Shuai once again hurried to the rescue. The guy tried to put him in place, but he was hardly possible to do this. At the same time, Fu asked Su whether she was injured and whether everything was fine. The girl thanked Gao and tried to step aside, but did not have time to step back. Suddenly for himself, the guy noticed that she could be sweet and kind. For a moment, he forgot about the sideboard, who continued to fall on them. The main character, with all his might, held an extremely heavy closet and said that everything would be in order. Bai, however, caught herself thinking that Shuai turns out to be courageous. However, the forces of Fu were running out, and the sideboard began to win in this fight. In the end result, the sideboard nevertheless collapsed on them and crushed them to the floor. Everything happened quickly enough, and Gao did not have time to do anything, as he had already ended up in Xiao. The girl was much heavier because she was under the weight of a guy and a bulky sideboard. In this connection, she began to scream so that the teenager immediately stood up from her and pushed the closet. In the meantime, the inspired Li was heading along the corridor to the Bai cabinet, which after a couple of seconds opened the door and joyfully stated that he had a gift for Jue. But suddenly he discovered a rather entertaining picture, from which he was bewilderment. Fu recognized his voice and realized that it was Sui who decided to go to his boss. Bai continued to yell angrily so that Shuai finally got up from her, as she was painful. Gao immediately urged them to help them to push the sideboard, accidentally flooded on them. Shui also recognized that impudent cleaner in him and replied that he had no right to order him. Soon, of course, he helped them get out and suggested that Xiao take him to the hospital in order to be examined. Fu was in an extremely deplorable state because it only recovered from the recent injuries. But suddenly, Bai ignored whether she saw how the teenager would unwell. Then she completely approached him and said that with his wounds he should not move a lot and should go to the doctor. After which she ordered Sui to find someone to get out of her office while she takes Shuai to the hospital. Li, in turn, was dumbfounded by this behavior of his beloved boss. After a certain time, the girl safely delivered the young man to the hospital. After undergoing an examination, the nurse summed up that there was nothing serious, but it is better for him to avoid loads in the near future. Then the girl smiled maliciously. Naturally, they realized what they were talking about and blushed sharply, after which one voice said that they were not a husband and wife, but a boss and a subordinate. The young nurse in turn did not argue, but her smile did not leave her face. Xu immediately said that since everything was in order, then he should go to the campus to rest. The perplexed Shuai asked if she really didn't want to undergo an examination for various bruises. Bai answered negatively and added that she was in a hurry to work too much. In addition, her bones are not as fragile as his, and she never panicked prematurely. Naturally, Xiao deliberately provoked a teenager to aggression, which he instantly blurted out in her direction. Subsequently, their relationship, as always, accepted the usual course of development. Gao caught himself thinking that he had never met anyone nicer Xin Yui. At this moment, the nurse wrote out Fu account for hospitalization in the amount of 460 yuan. Fu was bitterly realized that he could not see salaries with all the deductions this month. Turning around, the young man suddenly stumbled upon the butler, Lu, and asked if he was unhealthy. But the old man said that the young lady urgently needs his help. After a certain time, the main character, along with Lu, arrived at the Xinyu house. Where John's servant held Shuai to Shi's office, the teenager greeted the head of the family. Father Yu kindly asked the guy to sit down and draw up a company for them. Gao saw an unknown man. Then Jean introduced him, his friend named Lun. They also worked together in the company. The gentleman immediately spoke, heard about the young talent, which of you made a diligent student, adding that he does not even believe in such an incredible ability to rehearse few. Shui modestly replied that this was not his merit, because Xin is a really talented girl. At that moment, the extremely joyful Yu suddenly ran into the room and went to her teacher. The young lady suddenly took his arm and said that she had been waiting for him for a long time. The dumbfounded Gao urged her to behave more modest, because they are now in the wrong situation. Tao was shocked by the behavior of the girl and could not believe that she was so interested in them. She instantly made her a remark and asked to behave more restrained, while Lun was bewilderment. Finally, the girl left the office and stated that she had a gift for the teacher. Tao also showed a desire to climb with her into the room, which he informed his father. Passing by Shui, the teenager in a characteristic way looked at him, making it clear that he did not like him. It was mutually. At the same time, Gao could not understand why the Lun family behaves as if he were their worst enemy. Soon they began to discuss the influence of the Bai family. intending to somehow influence the situation. Fu decided not to climb into other people's affairs and hurried to leave Jean's office to go to his daughter. However, she suddenly asked him about the Bai family, urging him to express his opinion about them. The surprised guy asked whether Mr. Liu really interests his opinion. Jean smiled and confirmed his words, saying that he was extremely curious to hear his opinion on this subject. Gao did not expect to be in such a situation, because he worked for the Bai family. Suddenly, Lun said that the usual tutor did not understand anything in such matters, but she assured him that Fu is a non-standard thinking person, and that is why he needs his advice. Then the young man gathered his thoughts and asked in advance for forgiveness for the possibly erroneous statement. Then he said that both corporations are quite successful, but Bai lacks resources, and Liu of creative thinking. In this connection, instead of enmity, they will be best united for joint prosperity, since they have complementary funds. Lun, in turn, stated that they have been competing in the market for many years, and this is excluded. However, Shai liked the opinion of the tutor, and he asked about this with the sudden named Su. The teenager turned back and saw in the doorway of Xiao, from which he was at a loss. The girl noted that the teacher Gao is a truly smart person, and she would like to know the details of his proposal. The moon, in turn, was shocked by the unexpected appearance of a direct competitor. No less dumbfounded, Shuai asked her how she ended up here. Bai smiled and said that it was a familiar business to do business and that is why she was here. The young man suggested that in fact this morning she talked about these matters. Fu instantly looked at Jean pleased with himself and realized that they had already planned everything. Shi, in turn, kindly suggested that Su will join them to discuss possible cooperation. The girl sat down at Gao and called him to act according to the situation. He immediately asked, "She talked about these matters today?" Xiao answered positively. Liu instantly offered to go to business because Miss Bai is an extremely busy person. However, Lun said that the tutor is clearly superfluous in such a case, and he should leave the room. But Zui said that Fu is her personal assistant and therefore he will be present at the negotiations. What brought him to bewilderment? Lun asked for, "Is it really true?" The young lady repeated her answer. The protagonist immediately broke into a malicious grin. Jean noticed that he was just dreaming of such an assistant as a teacher Shuai, adding that Bai just has a talent for the selection of staff. The girl smiled sweetly. Zhui asked if it was true that the teacher of Gao brought to the ideal sin skills. Fu, meanwhile, realized why Lud really called him to get closer to Xiao and reassure the moon. After a certain time, they discussed the issues of joint cooperation that interests them. Shuai nevertheless found a way to break out to Yu, as he understood that she had been waiting for him for a long time. The guy immediately went to her room and knocked on the door, but no one answered. Then the teenager went into her room and saw Tao, who literally seduced his gaze. The perplexed Gao asked where Sin was. The young man ignored his question. Then he asked what his relationship with Yu, while calling him an old man. What got out of himself, but he restrained himself in a timely manner and tried to calm down. Then he replied absolutely calmly and naturally that she was his student and no more. Then, the arrogant Malay offered him 20,000 wen so that Shui would no longer appear in this house. Gao decided to play with him this exciting game and noticed that this is too little for such a requirement. The young man said that this was quite predictable and offered 50,000. Fu continued to fill his price and once again said that this was not enough. An angry teenager suddenly offered 70,000, and Shui said he should think. Then Tao raised to 80,000 yen, and the guy agreed to such conditions. The Malayan handed him a check for this amount and called for immediately to leave. But Gao noticed that if Yu did not let him go, then he was not to blame. However, at the time of the transfer of the check, Sin came in and was perplexed in bewilderment. Then the girl asked what they were doing and what was talking about. Tao said that her teacher wants to tell her an extremely important thing. At the same time, the young man affectionately called her Xiaoyu, which brought her to rabies, and the reaction followed instantly. Then the young lady took the teacher's hands and asked what exactly he wanted to tell her. Shui gathered his thoughts and said that today he would last a lesson with her. The girl immediately burst into tears, not understanding what happened and why he decided so. Tao, in turn, was dumbfounded by such a statement, because they agreed that Fu would leave right away. Yi began to say that she was clearly a burden for him, and already managed to get bored. Gao immediately hastened to refute her guesses and said that this was not the point. Then he asked, was his presence so important for her, and he should stay? Naturally, Xin Yui replied that she wanted him to stay and did not go anywhere. Stunned by such a desire of the girl, Tao did not know how to influence the situation. The protagonist hugged Yu and said that in this case he would certainly remain. Loon understood that the guy on purpose did this and simply deceived him, receiving a lot of money. In this connection, the angry mallet said that he would not leave this and headed for the exit. Then he slammed the door from the other side. Sin only ran his gaze. Then the perplexing girl asked the teacher what happened. Then Fu showed her a check for a large sum of money and said that Tao tried to buy it and throw it out of her house. The young lady fell into rabies and said that he had crossed all the borders. Gao, in turn, noticed that in fact there is his fault in what happened. Yu asked how much he paid Shui for making him leave this house. The teenager replied that he paid 80,000 yuan, but that is not the point. However, the girl nervously stated that this was an extremely small amount for such a request, adding that even for $1 million she will not agree to release her beloved teacher. The young man was shocked by such a statement of young talent and fell silent sharply. Singh continued to say that Fu could not be exchanged for money and Tao did low. Then, once again, Gao called not to leave her alone so that it would not happen. Shui seemed to be a rather strange conversation, but on the other hand, he understood Yu's feelings, after which the guy asked her what she had wanted to talk to him about before. Xin Yui thought for a while and suddenly remembered, in connection with which she ran to the chest of drawers. Soon she returned to the teacher with the phone and said that this was a gift for him. I did not expect such a surprise and asked why she decided to give him the phone. The joyful girl said that she wanted to make the teacher a pleasant man, especially since he liked this brand. Gao, in turn, could not explain to her that he simply could not afford another mobile phone. Then he said that, since this is a gift from the heart, he does not dare to abandon him. Shui also gave his homework Xin Yui, saying that she should do everything before his next parish. But the capricious girl did not want to do anything. Fu insisted on her. Passing butler suddenly heard their dispute. Soon, the young man hastened to return to his campus. Yu said that Lu would take him, but the teenager refused. Meanwhile, Gao wandered along the dark streets, reflecting on what had happened. Suddenly, on the way to the stop, he met Aunt Van and called out to her. Seeing her 2 packages in her hands, Shui, like a true gentleman, decided to help her convey the products home. But when he took the bags in his hands, he sharply crushed him to the ground. Van asked to return to her at least 1 bag. As a result, Fu gave the aunt one of the bags, and they walked at her home with a walking step. Gao noticed, a woman is extremely strong, once wears such heavy bags. But Van said she was already used to it. Having carried out aunt, Shui hurried to the stop as Wang reported. The old woman smiled. Then she suddenly asked the young man whether he was free in the evening. Fu was not ready for this issue and began to mumble something under the nose. As a result, the woman invited him to dinner to her home, saying that the granddaughter will also come to her. The teenager was shocked by the fact that Van still has not thrown out this venture from his head. After some time, the protagonist was already at home at the aunt to get acquainted with her granddaughter. Being at the woman's front door, Gao still tried in vain to avoid this fate. However, the old woman assured him that he would definitely like her granddaughter. Finally, Van inserted the key into the keyhole and checked it, then opened the door. But a strange picture appeared before them. A complete mess was happening in the house. All things were casually scattered around the apartment. Shui, like the old woman, was shocked, not understanding what to do. Suddenly, the aunt began to panic and shouted that there was a thief in her apartment. Fu instantly urged her to check whether valuable things were in place and what exactly was stolen. The dumbfounded woman immediately rushed to run around the apartment and inspect all things. Gao carefully crossed the scattered objects on the floor and tried to find something explaining what happened. Suddenly, his gaze fell on a certain notebook, and he instantly rushed to her to love. It turned out to be a high school student. The guy slowly reached for the book. Shui suggested that there would be the name of her granddaughter inside and decided to check his guesses. Flying a textbook, Fu wanted to understand if they knew each other with the granddaughter of Aunt Van. However, at that moment, the old man hit him on the head of the pillow several times, thinking that he was a thief. A moment later, the woman apologized for her grandfather's behavior and asked the young man to sit on the sofa. She herself ran for ice to attach him to the head of the injured guest. The main character sat on the couch and thought only about one thing: why he met this old woman. At this time, Gao heard the conversation of the elderly, as the door was open. As it turned out, this mess arranged for the granddaughter and pretended to be a thief in the apartment because she did not want to meet anyone. In this connection, the teenager hurried to leave this madhouse and no longer appear in him. Shui instantly said goodbye to the elderly and said that he still had a lot to do, after which the guy opened the front door, realizing that today is clearly not his day. Van asked for forgiveness for this incident, while Gao rushed to leave their house. Finally going out on the landing and heading for the elevator, the teenager sighed with relief. Suddenly, Fu decided to see how much time and began to look for the phone that Xinyu gave him. Shui continued to clap his pockets, hoping to find the phone, but never found it, from which Gao literally came into rabies, because most likely he was in the apartment of Van. And no matter how he would like to return to the house of strange people, it was necessary to do this. The elevator doors opened. The young man thought only about one thing that needed to be returned to the cell phone as soon as possible. However, in the doorway, the guy saw the girl's rather familiar face. Fu was bewilderment when he recognized Lula in her and simply froze in place. Lin was also shocked by such an unexpected meeting with him and did not know what to say. The main character could not understand in any way. Did fate not give him a chance? Get rid of this girl? After all, she brought him only pain and suffering. But this should come to an end. However, every time Gao meets her, his heart freezes, and he cannot think about anything. The elevator doors unexpectedly began to close. The lovers continued to look at each other, but at the last moment they pulled their hands by the sash and opened the elevator. What was quite difficult to do, especially such a fragile girl as Lula. Initially, they looked at each other for a long time and did not utter a word, after which they suddenly laughed and once again met their eyes. Finally, Shui said that he had come to visit someone. Lin called it an incredible coincidence. Gao immediately broke into a smile and noticed that they had not seen her for a long time. The girl also smiled and said that time flies quickly and nothing to do with it. After that, again, an awkward silence overtook them. Lula slowly lowered her eyes to the floor. Inside the guy, he understood that they did not go along the way, but his heart did not let her go. Suddenly, Lin said that she needed to leave. Of course, Fu did not interfere with her. The main character only wished her good luck and smiled again, then moved towards the exit. In the end result, they passed by and suddenly the young lady turned around. Lula just as unexpectedly called to the teenager. The surprised Shui turned to her. The girl asked him to stay not for a short while, then again set a simple task for him. After all, it was most correct to leave, and he realized it. But his heart, as always, kept repeating about something else. Finally, Gao gathered his thoughts and refused her, asking for forgiveness. Lin was in shock. Subsequently, which literally began to persuade him to give her a couple of minutes. Fu sighed heavily, but could not do anything with himself and slowly approached her. Then they again went into the elevator, and the girl pressed the floor she needed. The doors began to close. They stood silently and looked at the floor, not knowing what to say and not understanding whether there was a need for this. Suddenly, Lula began to speak. But it was at that moment that something incomprehensible happened to the elevator. A characteristic sound of iron friction appeared, then the elevator and completely broke down. Young people were shocked by such a turn of events and did not know what to do. Bewildered, Lin rushed into the arms of a teenager, thinking that this is the last seconds of their life. Shui also hugged her. The elevator fell down at an incredible speed, creating the same rattle. But at some point, the elevator booth stopped abruptly and it all ended. Gao sighed with relief, realizing that the elevator was stuck between the floors. The frightened Lin said that she was already preparing for the worst, but fortunately everything worked out. Fu noted that he had already pressed the emergency call button and soon they would be pulled out of here. In fact, he himself was scared no less than her, but in every way tried not to show it. Suddenly, Lula grabbed the guy by the hand. He thought that Lin was still afraid. In this connection, Shui smiled and tried to calm the poor girl. However, a moment later, she bit his hand, which led him into bewilderment. Naturally, Fu asked why she did this and what was happening at all.